Hey guys, tonight we begin with, is the world of medieval assassins really glamorous? They were shadowy figures slipping through castle corridors and alleyways, twisting history with a blade and a whisper. Hollywood may make them look cool, but the truth is this. Being an assassin then was cold, filthy, and far worse than the legends. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. No one in the Middle Ages sprang from bed and announced, "Today I'll take up the noble art of throttling nobles for pocket change." Assassination wasn't a calling, it was a cul-de-sac. You arrived there when the road went bad and kept going. The folk who found themselves in that shadow were not mystic adepts tutored by lantern light on mountain terraces. They were the debris of broken lives, farmhands with no harvest, soldiers cashiered without pay, thieves whose nerve exceeded their prospects, widowers no longer on any parish roll. If you had a trade, land, kin, who answered when you knocked, you didn't stalk sleeping men. You hired someone else to do that, and kept your hands scented with cloves. The hireling was the man the village had stopped counting, so thoroughly mislaid by fortune that his death would cause no one any paperwork. That's the first fracture in the romance. The second is management. If you had coin enough to want someone gone, you weren't about to risk your own skin. You sent a go-between with a purse and a name pronounced very softly. The name was never a thatcher who owed you rent. It was a baron who'd mislaid his mercy, a churchman with 2 chests of plate, a captain who'd changed allegiance once too often. Work that mattered, guarded by men who were paid precisely to notice unusual breathing in corridors. The fee glimmered like salvation, because the rest of your life had none, but it was a mirage. Payment, when it arrived at all, arrived late, light, and often with an aftertaste of treachery. Half now and half later meant half now and run for your life later. There was no guild hall for the trade, no oaths by candle, no box of bylaws, no retirement chest. Smiths had charters, weavers had marks, even beggars had pitches and customs. But the quiet man with a knife had only bad company and a prayer. Nor was there glory. You could not keep a tally of deeds. Bragging was an occupational illness that shortened careers dramatically. Your references were silence and survival, and every time you raised your price for danger, you learned, again, that clients valued thrift over gratitude. It was cheaper to bury you than to thank you. What made a man hire a killer rather than a lawyer or a troop of spearmen? Sometimes law was too slow, sometimes honor too public, sometimes the target too popular to reach in daylight. A blade in the passage did what proclamations could not. It ended arguments. It also started others' hunts, purges, vigilant prayers, which was rarely your concern once you'd fled with your lungs and a handful of coins. If you fled with coins, because here is the sour arithmetic of the craft. Every person who knows you exist represents a cost to someone. The easiest way to zero that ledger is to stop your breath. The men who did the work were not mundane spectres gliding like rumors. They were awkward in their own clothes, brittle with hunger, owlish from sleep snatched in granaries and stables. They weren't trained to excellence. They adapted to not dying. Some had soldiering to lend them a stance and a grip. But camp drill does not teach you to climb eaves in the rain or to hold your sneezes in a chapel gallery while a steward lights candles below. The one thing they all learned quickly or fatally was that the job description was not kill a man, but kill a man and remain unremembered. The second clause is the difficult one. You'd think a city would be a good place to be nobody. Sometimes. Late medieval towns had watchmen and constables of a kind, but they were thin on the ground and thick with local loyalties. The hour bell kept time. The night watch kept order mainly by shouting it. If you were from away, your accent could betray you. If you were known, your very gate might do it. Parishes were nosy organisms. Strangers were noticed, and news travelled faster than carts. Oddly, anonymity grew easiest, not in the alley, but at the fair. Seasonal fairs were nations of a week densely packed, polyglot, loud, and transactional. You could vanish there because everyone was there to buy, sell, and stare at the curiosities, not count faces. In winter, with markets thin and nights long, your silhouette was a sermon. In fair time, with tented rows, pipers, and hawkers bawling, you were only another coat with somewhere to be. The work itself was not dramatic. It was tedium spiked with terror, days of following a routine, learning the rhythm of doors and the creak that betrays a certain stare. The guard who scratches on the turn, the maid who saves candle ends, the priest who always leaves his keys on the wrong nail. You became a student of other people's errors. When the hour came, it was quick, ugly, and often lonely. There was no flute music, no masked dance. A hand, a shove, a sound like dropped meat, and then a room full of air you couldn't breathe because your chest had remembered it was part animal. The pay was never what it needed to be. It had to compensate for a life shortened by fear, vermin, and bad beds, and it never did. Half now was a purse light enough to run with, and often just heavy enough to make you worth chasing. Half later meant your employer wanted a look at your breathing face one more time to calculate whether you represented risk. Many employers concluded that a body in a ditch was better value than a man who could speak. You learned, if you learned at all, to anchor your price in the first handshake, to demand what you could not live without, because you might not live with anything else. You also learned that insisting too boldly on terms was another mark against your survival. The balance between hunger and pride was a wire. You didn't keep a shop. You didn't keep a name. In inns, you were a carpet seller, a pilgrim, a mason between churches. You drank less than your nerves asked for and left before anyone began to like you. You didn't carve notches on anything. You didn't keep the cloak that worked once. It would become a story before it became a rag. The closest thing you had to a code was the superstition that noise kills. Not just the noise of feet and steel, but the noise of talk. You were a rumor in a city that loved rumors, and the surest way to survive a rumor is to let it meet no evidence. This is the part of the tale that never makes it to the plays, the way the craft unthreads the self. You stop using your hands when you speak because hands are biography. You stop laughing in crowds because laughter has an address. You stop sleeping long enough to dream. Friendship is a luxury you cannot afford. Loyalty is something you can sell and then spend the rest of your days running from. There is no wisdom in it, only habit. You are not a hero, not even a villain. You're a footnote other people hope never to read aloud. Meanwhile, the world you operate in has its own ways of making sure you don't thrive. Cities adopt curfews. Parishes ring the hour. Gates shut early when politics is sour. Cathedral closes, hire men to mind the night stare. Merchants band together for watch rota. Even the lanthorn boys, those who carry light for late travellers, learn to look hard at faces and shoes. It isn't a professional police force, not in the modern sense, but it is a civic immune system, and you are the infection it recognizes. Fairs may swallow you for a day. Winter quarters may forget you for a week, but sooner or later someone remembers, and a sketch goes up on a door with your jaw all wrong and your eyes too big, and a watchman who owes the baker a favor decides this is the night he becomes useful. You wouldn't pick this life. You'd slide into it because every other door shut quieter than the one marked, "Don't tell anyone what you do." If you're lucky, you last long enough to regret it. If you're unlucky, you last long enough to be paid once and learn, the hard way, that coin is a promise most dangerous after it's kept. The truth is simple and unlovely. Assassination is a service economy for people with nothing left to sell but danger, and danger is a product that never comes with a warranty. The work is terror without perks, and the most common cause of death in the profession is conversation. So dim the romance and keep the facts, It isn't a vocation, it's a vacancy. No guild, no glory, no evenings off, no ledger to boast about. Only hunger, stealth, the soft arithmetic of other people's risks, and the knowledge that your best day ends with you walking away quickly and not being remembered by anyone who can write. That is the last stop on the line. Beyond it, there is only quiet. You don't learn this trade from a master with a bell and a blackboard. You learn it from floors, from doors, from the wrong boot nail, on the wrong stair at the wrong hour, and the way sound travels down stone like gossip on market day. You learn it because the world keeps offering you chances to get killed, and you keep wanting another dawn. The first teacher is the step. Everyone thinks silence is a mystery when it is mostly weight. The foot that slaps tells on you. The foot that arrives in 2 parts heel. Then whisper gives you time to take the next breath. You practice on your own quarters because your own floorboards hate you least. Cross grain, knots, the loose third plank from the hearth, the place where winter warped the join and gives a creak like a mouse being dramatic. You map it with your body until you can walk the room in thick dark and set your toes only on the timber that forgives. The second teacher is the air in your face. Corridors have a draft even when shutters swear they're shut. That draft is a river you read with the hairs on your wrist. A turn that feeds you cold means a door ahead. A warm eddy means a body has been along here not long since. You fail often. You open into a servant's passage and meet a maid with a jug. You learn how not to look surprised. You learn how to be the sort of man who has always looked lost. Sneezing is a religion. There are tricks old wives' things, soldier things, monk things you picked up half-heard in a porch to push the need down and turn it into a swallow and a pinched tear. You practice them because dust is democratic, and all rafters have it. You learn to cough when carts rumble by, and to time it with the clatter of a dropped ladle in the kitchen 2 rooms away. Your lungs become diplomats. Your throat becomes a hinge you open only when the world is busy. You don't train with swords. The rooms where important people sleep are too small for heroics. A sword is a banner that says, "You've arrived, you haven't." You train with a short blade that fits under bread, and mostly you train with your hands, because sometimes the cleanest death is the one the physician will call a winter mistake. You learn the truth the poets leave out. Your aim is not to kill. Your aim is to leave. If a blade is the shortest path to departure, so be it. If the shortest path is to become a rumor that night did not remember, that is better. Ex-soldiers come into this line half-made and twice dangerous. They know how to hold weight low, how to keep a blade from telling on itself, how to read a courtyard guard's boredom. They also carry the camp in their bones. Hobnails click judgment on stone, buckles chatter. The hand goes to the hilt in a habit that becomes a signature. Militia drill teaches cadence and courage. Streetcraft teaches interruption and doubt. On the field you moved when the drum moved. Here you move when the corridor breathes. On parade you showed your shape. Here you become the shape a room expects to see, and then you aren't there. A veteran who cannot unlearn the shout that lives in the back of his throat is dead before he lifts a latch. The ones who live learn new reflexes. The pause at the hinge, the prayer to the latch, string. The refusal to stand in doorways where lamplight makes you a story. Your body becomes a list of customs. Hands, never dry enough to squeak, never damp enough to smear. Shoulders, never square in a passage. A square man owns the place, and you are never the owner. Eyes, low when you're the monk or the porter, high when you're the steward, exactly interested when you're the man with the key. Breath, borrowed. You take it when a tapestry sighs, when a dog huffs in sleep, when a shutter rattles in a wind that is not yours. You measure your day in other people's noises and spend them like coins. Doors are grammar. A good latch tells you a house's education. A new latch speaks in the voice of a steward who will notice you. An old latch tells you who oils it and when. A rope and peg latch tells you a child can wake this house by sneezing. You learn to lift, not pull. to push with your knuckles, not your palm, because wood remembers hands and oil remembers skin. You learn that the door which was easy to open is always easy to close on you, so you prop with a shoe, a wedge, a lie. You acquire rules not because rules are noble, but because rules are quicker to fetch than judgment in a crisis. Never touch twice. The second touch is how you get caught. Never go in on a bell change. The temporary captain will try too hard and spot you because he needs a story. Never wear the same lie 2 days running in a small town. If you must run, run like a man who belongs there. If you must stand still, stand like furniture. Poison is the part everyone thinks is elegant. It is the part most likely to make you a fool. There is no book. There are weeks of trial with herbs whose names the midwife will not say in front of children. Powders that a barber whispers about as if they were saints. Stones that apothecaries keep in drawers with labels that lie. You learn that most so-called poisons are poets' work, slow, treacherous, and fond of killing the wrong man first. You learn the cooked meat, the copper pot, the stale ale can all betray you faster than anything you bought. You discover tasters are not ornaments and dogs have better noses than priests. And you learn, if you live to learn, that any plan which requires a precise pinch in kitchen chaos is a plan written by a playwright. Herbal roulette is what it is called by men who want to keep their sleeves clean. You prefer your sleeves honest. There are little schools if you're lucky. An older thief shows you how to take stairs sideways because heel first keeps them quiet and toe first looks like guilt. A scribe you once did not rob teaches you how to hold a candle without dripping because wax at the wrong hour is a confession. A washerwoman at a river ford gives you the gift of knowing which clothes mark a man as from away, even when he thinks he's dressed like the village. These are your mentors, people with nothing to teach officially and everything to lose by teaching you. The lessons come wrapped as grumbling and end, if they end, with you not being blamed for something you didn't do. Practice happens at dusk, not noon. You go where noise covers you the quarter hour when the watch changes, when the kitchen spills its clatter into the yard, when a cart rattles over the only piece of good paving the town possesses. You practice on doors that don't matter. Turn a latch, count 2, let it lie. You practice on shutters. Lift a peg and put it back 1 hole shy, so the morning tells you if anyone noticed. You practice on yourself. Can you be the sort of man who looks exactly like he belongs in a corridor where he does not? Can you learn to admire tapestries as if you were born to do it? There are drills that hurt because they're truer than you want. You stand in a pantry and count breaths while someone you paid to be cruel moves about in the next room. You pinch the nose of fear until it goes numb. The first time you try a window, you cut your hand and learn that blood smells like news. The second time you wrap your palm before you touch the sill as if the house were a tooth that might bite. The rule of blades returns each night like a bell. You whisper it until your mouth believes it. Escape matters more than aim. Men die of second thrusts. Men live who walk away from first chances not taken because the room changed its mind. You plan the exit before you look for the bed. You count the steps to the nearest door that opens away from the kitchen and towards the dark. You notice the rug that wants to fold you like a letter. You learn the line you will say to the steward if he asks, "Your business?" And you learn to believe it so he will. If all your plans require courage, your plans are bad. Good plans require manners. And when you have learned all of this, boards, breath, latches, lies, you discover that the world keeps inventing new mistakes for you to make. A dog that never barked learns to be young again. A child sits up in a trundle because his dream told him there was a visitor. A pilgrim decides to be pious at an hour that ruins you. There is no graduation. There is only the next room and the next rule, and the knowledge that the best proof of your learning is not a body cooling on a bed, but a lane you walk down quickly without being followed. You do not improve so much as you narrow. Your repertoire shrinks to what works, and what works is smaller than pride will admit. You keep your kit simple, your pockets honest, your stories shorter than questions. And if you live long enough, you find that your greatest skill is not in ending hearts, but in leaving none broken that needn't be, because the fewer people who remember you, the more mornings you get to forget them back. It isn't noble, this education. It isn't even clever. It is repetition, a litany of small disciplines practiced until they become joints. The body learns. The mind stops arguing. The hands find the latch in the dark, as if the dark were a friend. And if you are very fortunate, one night the floor does not speak, the air is kind, the door sighs the way a door ought, and you go in and do nothing at all, because nothing is safer than everything. The craft has no diploma to hand you. It gives you only this. You saw the room, you chose the exit, and you left before the story needed your name. The purse on the table is the oldest lie in Europe. It sits a precise handspan from the elbow of the man who wants a problem to go away, the mouth of it pinched shut with a smart knot that says, "See, I have thought of everything." He says half now, half later, as if that were prudence. It is not prudence, it is leash. Half now buys your risk, half later buys your silence or your funeral. The arithmetic is clear to everyone in the room, and clearest of all to the one not there. The man who has hired you has already costed your death and found it cheaper than your wage. You are told there will be a verification, a word that looks like fairness and works like a trap. Bring a token, bring a sign from the chamber, bring the ring the right hand wore, the seal ragged from wax, a hair cut from the pillow, a scrap of shirt with yesterday's gravy. What they mean is, put your head within our reach one more time, and do it carrying proof of guilt. Sometimes they ask for the impossible blood in a vial, or a signature stolen from a corpse, as if setting you tasks were a sacrament. Sometimes they keep it simple. A meeting place, a time, a warning not to be tailed, which is to say, make yourself alone. The decoy is the meanest trick because it flatters your craft. A double is set same height, same cloak, a habit of cough, and the room is laid for disaster. The guards are not where you'd expect them. They are where a clever man will look last. You play your part to perfection because you are competent, because you have practiced, because you have taught your lungs to wait and your hands to think. You touch the wrong skin by design. Doors burst. Torches bloom. Men whose boots never squeak suddenly sound like harvest. The purse that tempted you was never meant to open. It was meant to clink loud enough to pull you close. There is no court to save you from any of this. You cannot plead in a hall of law, your worship. I performed an agreed murder, and my employer declines to settle the balance. The law has no column for your grievance, except the one labeled spectacle. The only breach of contract it recognizes is the breaking of your neck, even if you had papers and you never do. Men who want you keep you unwritten. Your very attempt to enforce your wage would serve as the horn that calls the hunt. Intermediaries make it worse and pretend to make it better. A broker will take a cut to smooth things, to carry the purse, to pass the name. He'll talk about escrow, about the coin held by a third hand, until the deed is sweet and the night is quiet. What he holds is motive and leverage, and what he sells is your whereabouts to whoever pays him most. The safest middleman is a grave, and those are famously expensive to relocate. Coin itself lies. It arrives clipped, foreign, debased, heavy with plate stolen from a chapel 3 counties over that will get you questioned at a toll. It arrives marked subtly scored or stained, so that when you spend it, the wrong ear hears and the wrong hand makes a note. You thought money would let you run. Money is a bell you have to ring every time you feed yourself. You learn to launder it through markets where goods turn fast, through fairs where 100 hands change purses in an hour. You learn not to let a single coin taste the same tavern twice. The client's calculus is brutally clean. He needs an ending. He buys 2. One is yours to deliver, one is yours to become. He hires the second killing from the first coin. Sometimes he is sentimental, and sends men who will wait until you have slept. Sometimes he is frugal and takes you at the meeting. A knife to the kidney is cheaper than a handshake. Loyalty is a cost center. Thrift is a virtue. Once in a while you meet a patron who pays in full because he likes the theatre of his own honor. He will do it once. He will discover how it feels to part with money when fear could do the job for free, and he will not repeat the sensation. More often, the men with purses have learned from other purses that the world does not punish shorting the nameless. You are narrative waste to them, a line to be cut in the edit to tighten the pace. The stings that work best are domestic. Kitchens are labyrinths you think you can learn, and kitchens are staffed by women who notice hands. The vignette, every man in this trade carries no names, because names become ghosts, is set on a wet Thursday at a bishop's palace. The go-between says the table is generous and the bishop careless. The steward keeps keys but keeps a mistress more. The tasters are perfunctory, a quick tap of spoon and nod. The job is simple, a powder in the sauce. The house is quieter than a cloister when you step at dusk. Fires banked, scullions sent to fetch. A single pot on a back hob, breathing like a patient. You work the way you practiced, palm wrapped, packet palmed, your face exactly bored. The ladle sits by a trencher. You lift, you tip, you stir twice clockwise because that is how the old wives say to wake flavors. The silence is the wrong kind of kind. Then, from the buttery, a cough you recognize as theatre, the sort actors use to make sure even the deaf hear. The door opens with the slowness of men proud of their timing, not soldiers, not even the diocesan guard, kitchen boys with cudgels and 3 clerks with lanterns and, worst of all, the bishop himself with his napkin untied and his smile full of triumph and wine. He is not careless. He is lonely for victory. He wants a confession, a name, a sponsor he can damn from the pulpit. The ladle in your hand becomes a witness. The packet leaves grit on your fingers you will taste later as you run. How you leave that room is your story. This one ends messy and alive because the back door had a rain barrel, and the rain barrel had a lid, and the alley had a dog that barked at a lantern, not at a man. It could as easily end with a cudgel's thud and a sermon, and your hands on a steak slathered in the kitchen's oil. The moral is dull enough to live by. Any plan that rests on the predictability of other people's hunger is a plan written for you by your enemies. Sometimes the decoy is the target. You are sent to kill a cousin already dead in the books, so the client can arrest you for the murder of a man who will appear tear-streaked and scandalized at your trial. Sometimes the payment meeting is a priest's house, because even wolves like to share the pen when they hunt. Sometimes the purse is proof of your presence and nothing else. You think you are adding weight to your pocket. You are adding a line to their ledger. This man came, took, and left. Therefore this man can be found. Half now, half later, is not only about coin, it is about leverage. The first half binds you with hope, the second half binds you with fear. The players on the other side have titles, seals, kinships, and time. You have a blade, bad sleep, and a face you are trying to forget before the watch remembers it. The reason no guild grows around your craft is not that men lack ambition. It is that guilds require courts and reckoning, and your economy is built on unreckoned men, so you set terms you can survive. You insist softly, as if asking for salt on payment that moves through hands you trust more than his, on a place of your choosing, on coin that is already dirty from a market you will never see again. You plan to walk away from the purse if the room is wrong, because keeping your breath is the only profit you can bank. You behave as if your life were worth more than money, and discover, when you manage it, that this is the only heresy the trade allows. In the end, you know what your employer knows. It is cheaper to kill you than pay you. Your only counter is to be dearer dead than alive, so unknown that your corpse teaches nothing, so inconvenient to catch that thrift runs out of breath, so absent from the story that no one can convincingly claim to have met you. You work for coin, but you live on doubt, And the good news, if there is any, is that doubt pays on time. The kit lives where breath does, close, quiet, and never flashy. Under a decent cloak, you can carry very little that won't betray you with weight, shape, or shine. A short dagger is the heart of it, nothing curved like a fable, nothing jeweled, nothing that says story. Plain steel, a grip you've roughened with twine, a scabbard that doesn't squeak when you move. You keep it oiled with whatever the kitchen won't miss, tallow if you're lucky, lamp fat if you're not. The blade brings its metal smell with it, a cold tang that clings to hands and memory. You rub onion on your palm before you go in, so if anyone asks, you are helping in the scullery. When the light goes, when it's pitch darkness, that smell becomes its own presence. And in that dark, it's your pulse in your ears that counts time better than any bell. After the dagger comes rope, because rope is verbs. Climb, lower, bind, haul, wedge. 16 feet will do more work than 30 if you know your knot's clove hitch to hold, bowline to rescue, a figure eight where panic lives. Rope is also a disguise. A length about your waist makes you a carter. Slung on a shoulder, it makes you a help. Coiled wrong, it makes you a story. If you can find a garrote, it will be wire from a snare or good pack thread, triple twisted, knotted on toggles so your hands speak without slipping. It is a cruel instrument and a clumsy one, unless your courage is colder than your fingers. Those who think it's quiet have never felt a man's spine refuse the lesson. Those who know aim for leaving, not drama. A shove, a choke, a fold to the floor, and the door you measured with your eyes already open in your mind. Bows? Not in a palace. A longbow is an announcement that walks ahead of you by 6 feet. A crossbow is a chest you have to wind while time watches. The string sings at the wrong pitch, the quarrel clatters where silence should live, and the first guard who hears will always be the one with the memory for echoes. In tight rooms, doors own you. A bow needs air, an angle you cannot buy indoors. You can smuggle a half bow in, true, but by the time you've made it speak, 3 people will have learned you exist. If you must throw hands, not wood. Poison is chaos in a little paper twist. Herbs make poets of men who haven't earned the rhyme. Kitchen work is wind and hurry. There is never the same salt twice in a stew, never the same heat under the same pot. You cannot measure a man's death by a pinch taken in the half-light. Tasters are not ornaments, and dogs are not fond of theatre. Minerals are worse. They travel in the wrong direction and stay when you go. The packet dusts your fingers. The cup answers to light in ways you cannot predict. A priest with a nose for wine will call your bluff before God does. If poison must be part of the story, let it be the ritual of the purse. A smear on the knot, a dust on the cord, the sort of dose that punishes hands that mean to throttle you at the pay table. In kitchens, herbal roulette belongs to men who want you caught trying. The rest of the kit is improvisation. A tile from a roof is a knife in an hour. Snap it long ways under cloth, and you have a cutter that worries flesh even through wool. A peg from a gate gives you 3 miracles. Wedge a door behind you, so a pursuit loses minutes. Lift a latch from outside through a crack you found at noon. Prop a shutter so your breath can leave with the smoke. A nail is a princeling. It opens locks that only needed to be told to behave. It becomes a caltrop with 2 bends to eat a man's foot through his pride. It is a stiletto for leather seams. These little things live in a waxed cloth roll you keep soft against your belly-awl. Needle, pins, a thumb of beeswax, a stub of chalk to mark which hinge was friendly. The chalk wipes away, the memory doesn't. The 3-beat that keeps you honest returns when it wants to. You smell the metal before you touch it. You taste the room's darkness before you move. You listen for the pulse behind your jaw, where fear keeps its metronome. All kit is vanity without those 3. All craft lives because of them. Light is not part of the kit unless you treat it like a sin. Lanterns brag, candles confess. If you must have flame, You use a hooded stub with a tin shield and a slit so thin you resent your own eyes. Better to move by other people's fire ash on hearths, sleep in coals, the pail that spills under doors when a steward writes accounts. You learn how to feel light rather than show it. The warm on a wall that tells you a torch has just turned the corner. The cold that warns you the next corridor hoards its dangers with pride. Hands and feet become tools when tools betray you. Gloves are linen rubbed in soot so you don't varnish wood with the oil of your life. Boots are leather skivved thin and dressed with tallow so they talk in whispers. Hobnails are cowardice unless you're on a road. Indoors they write your confession in sparks. You teach your steps to land heel then whisper, never slap. You teach your body to turn sideways at doors, so your profile makes less gossip for walls. If you have a luxury, it is a key hook, a sliver of iron, bent just so to lift a latch through a seam. It stinks of forge, that unmistakable metal smell, so you keep it in waxed cloth with a scrap of time. In pitch darkness, you slide it through, you lift, you breathe once, and count the pulse out. 1, 2, 3. The time it takes for a sleeping dog to decide it dreamt you. Some carry bread with a heart cut out. A folded dagger lives there, dull on the outside, honest within. Some carry a tinderbox, but you'll strike it once in a quiet corridor and understand why veterans chew the urge to have warmth. Better a stolen ember, better a breath saved for the run. A water skin is worth more than courage when blood dries on hands that need to look like pump hands. A rag is more useful than pride when you must erase your shadow from a polished chest. There is a small awl for leather. Your boot, their strap, a hinge pin that thinks it will behave. There is waxed thread to bind a thing that shouldn't have moved, or to leave a hair taut across a door so you'll know if the world was inside after you left. There is salt, not for flavor, for the blood, to change what it looks like under poor light. There is vinegar in a vial, no larger than a saint's tooth. One drop on a tile will tell you if it is lime-rubbed and treacherous. One drop on a rag will steal a smell your life cannot afford to keep. You will be tempted by cleverness springs, hooks, little iron mouths that bite when pulled. They look like safety to men who like tools more than outcomes. You will learn that cleverness rusts where courage doesn't, that weight tells tales against you before a word is said, that the only instrument you can trust is the habit of leaving. At the very end of every kit, when the roll is tied and the cloak lies flat and the blade is a line against your ribs, you look to the 3 you cannot pack. The metal smell that warns you who you are, the pitch darkness you must be on speaking terms with, and the pulse in your ears that is your only clock when time tries to drown you. With those, a tile is a dagger, a peg is a key, and a nail is a sentence. Without them, even the finest steel is just a rumor that will get you killed. The rest is thrift and manners. Don't carry what you won't use. Don't use what you can't explain. Don't explain what you can escape. The toolkit of desperation is a handful of small, stubborn things, and the discipline to let them be enough. Anything more is theatre, and theatre is for men who want to be seen. You are paid to be absent. Targets worth paying for are built like bad weather. You can see them coming, and you can't quite get out from under. Their houses are not homes. They are machines designed to humiliate intruders. The first lesson is that a castle is not one thing. It is layers that refuse you. The barbican sits out in front like a handshake that breaks fingers and outer work with its own door and teeth. You cross a bridge that can vanish into a ditch at the pull of a chain. You reach an outer gate that lifts, if it lifts, into a gatehouse that is a corridor with opinions. A gatehouse is not a tunnel. It is a killing room. Walls pierced with arrow loops, ceiling drilled with murder holes, floor that hides grates. If it goes wrong in there, men you cannot see poor things. You cannot endure boiling water, hot sand, stones that fall like verdicts. If you live past that, there is a portcullis front and one behind, so the space between can become a purse that the house draws shut. Beyond, there is inner ward and inner gate, and maybe another, each with lines of fire you cannot answer because you were paid to be quiet. You learn the small geographies, the sally port that lets men who belong sneak out, the postern that a steward uses to visit a woman who is not his, the water gate where casks come at dawn, the gardens that are not gardens at all, but sightlines to make your life short. Stairs spiral clockwise as they climb, so a right-handed defender gains elbow room and you do not. Door leaves open inward, so you must drag them towards your chest, showing your shape and losing a hand to the latch. Thresholds raise a thumb or more to trip the rushing and wake the sleeping. You cannot beat the stone. You must beat the people who are required to live inside it. Guards are pattern plus pride. They are men with cadence. The boot that drags on the sixth step, the throat that clears at the turn, the pace that shifts when they pass the chapel, and try not to look. Knights have rhythm you can learn. The hour bell, the call of all's well, from the north wall answered by the west, then south, then east, the silence before the countersign where two men meet and become twice as loud. Watches change on the quarter in houses that like order, on the half in houses that like drink. In both cases, the minute before and the minute after are the seconds you can buy. You time your breath to their habits. You teach your lungs to be bells. Kitchens are your informants and your executioners. A castle eats as hard as it fights, and the kitchen talks because it must. What is hot? Who is late? Who does not like lamb? Who sends back the fish? Which door the steward prefers because it squeaks least? Which dog steals fat from the spit? Scullions don't know secrets, they know facts. Cooks know the timetable of appetite, which is better. The buttery knows who drinks without paying. The pantry knows who steals. The ewery knows who is vain. The still room knows whose breath will smell like fennel at midnight. If you listen with the right ears, you can move through a house with a tray and a frown and never be asked your name. Feasts promise weakness and give you traps. When the hall is full, the lords are drunk and the servants busier than mercy. You imagine laxity. What you get is density. Extra tasters. Dogs under every table. Benches that hem your legs and make quickness a poem. Drunk guards are not soft. They are noisy, and noise is a net. The house doubles its watch to keep revel in and malice out. A feast is a time when a man who matters will walk a different route to show favor or disdain. It is also a time when everyone stares at doorways. If you wish to live, you move at the moment the salt is passed, when hands are busy with respect, or you don't move at all. Gossip moves like fire along rush. A stranger in a hood becomes 4 stories by vespers. A pilgrim with a limp, a tinker with a scar, a cousin no one likes. The chapel verger sees shoes first and faces last. The laundress sees stains and therefore sins. The falconer sees hands and therefore trade. The only eyes that truly help you are the stable lads. They know who comes and goes, and they can be bribed with the things boys always want: knife, cord, permission to be important. Architecture turns your body into its instrument. Corridors narrow where you want to run. Corners deny you sight until you've already promised your neck to the next yard. Machicolations hang like teeth along battlements, and the parapet walk is timed so 2 men can pass without touching, and 4 can meet and make you not a problem, but a story. Even the latrines, you will think of them because every man must, are built to be chimneys for smell and gossip, both set over the drop, shielded by a little roof called a garderobe that you will be tempted to use as a road. You won't. Men who try to enter castles via other men's bowels do not become legends, they become warnings. All of this stone, wood, people converges on the last small distance, the most expensive meter in Europe, the step between you and a bedchamber door. Before it, the carpet of rushes wants to whisper about you. The tapestry wants to brush your sleeve and carry your smell like a letter. The dog wants to be a hero. You have mapped the route from yard to stair, stair to gallery, gallery to turn, turn to door. You have learned which door sits and which sulks, the one that opens on a lobby with a coffer where a chamberlain dozes, the one that opens straight into closet with a rushlight, the one that opens onto nothing at all, because it was bricked up when the last lord was stabbed in a different century. You have counted hinge squeaks at noon and board groans at dusk. You have practiced a non-sneeze until your brain begs you to be human and you say no. The latch is a catechism. Some doors have a hasp you can lift with a blade. Some, a drop bar, only a fool would raise loud. Some, a rope that pulls a peg on the other side, with a sound that announces the entire plan to the next room. Some have warded locks that a little L-shaped pick can flatter open. Some have keys that live under pillows, because power is childish when it sleeps. You touch wood as if it were an old dog. You move it a finger's width and let it talk. You hold your breath so the door won't copy you. Inside is never like the stories. There is no moonlit saint of a man laid out for you. There is a draft that just found your neck, a coal that just remembered it was alive, a curtain that wants to catch the knife and become a witness. The bed is a heaped confusion of linen and human. The tester canopy lowers the ceiling to a 10-year-old's height. The chair where he put his boots now blocks the retreat you swore you'd take. Your hand knows the rule escape matters more than aim, but your blood talks treason against it, because blood likes endings. You time your step to the night patrol cadence you learnt an hour ago on the wall, walk outside the faint thump-thump, the cough, the mutter, the pause, and you make your motions in that borrowed rhythm. Hand, wait, breath, leave. You do not stab twice. Twice is for men who want to be remembered. If the house wakes, you become architecture. You are a shadow where a tapestry learned to ripple. You are furniture where a valet swears a stool never was. You are the quiet rush that carried a spill and then decided not to. You let the corridor own you, because fighting it will turn you into a guest, and guests are counted. You take the stair left, not because left is luck, but because down is where the gatehouse lives. And you have decided not to discuss life with murder holes tonight. You aim for the postern you visited in the rain, when no one was watching, and you leave by it like steam. And if the door will not give, if the last meter grows teeth, you do the bravest thing the trade ever asks. You take 3 steps backward, put the night between yourself and your intention, and live to learn a different route through the same stone. Pride dies quickly in houses like these. Men who keep it die quicker. The castle is designed to make you a lesson. Your only triumph is to refuse the class. Clothes lie for you exactly as long as people let them. A robe is a flag that says monk. A livery is a badge that says household. A hood and a hangdog stare say porter. None of them speak if the room refuses to listen. Disguise buys you 5 minutes of confusion, often less, and the bill always comes with interest. The cut is rarely right, the smell never is. A real monk brings cold stone, lamp oil, old vellum, damp wool. A borrowed habit brings soap from a stranger's hands, pitch from last night's roof, a faint reek of someone else's fear. Livery should carry kitchen, smoke, horse, sweet wine from the buttery salt fish in Lent. Yours carries the pewter tang of the blade you swore you wouldn't need. People don't see the differences in theatres. Houses aren't theatres. Houses know their own. You put on a cassock 2 sizes generous and think the extra cloth will hide you. It hides everything except your hands. Servants know hands. A scrivener's fingers are nicked with paper cuts and stained in the creases. A groom's knuckles heal with the geography of hooves. A tanner wears the river even at supper. Your hands reach for latches like a man who has had to open doors in the dark. Your nails are too clean for the stables, too ragged for the pantry. The laundress will forgive a stain. She will not forgive a stranger's cuticles. She will simply hold your gaze 1 second too long, and the house will begin to turn its head. Footwork ruins you next. Robes have hem memory. They learn the owner's stride. In your borrowed habit, the skirts drag or bounce at the wrong beat. A steward will not notice. The scullion will. Scullions live at floor height. They scrub rushes, collect trenchers, stoop for things the great drop, scuttle between benches and doors like bright mice. They know ankles and shoes the way falconers know wrists. They see whose soul splits, whose gait favors a morning bruise, whose instep tracks flour from the bakehouse. If your heel arrives half a heartbeat late to the corner, if your toe lifts to avoid a knot that only a stranger fears, the scullion looks up and thinks, "Not ours." He will not challenge you. He will mention you to the turnspit boy who carries news at the speed of smoke, and by the time you find the gallery, a porter will already be waiting to practice his courtesy. Households are hierarchies disguised as families. At the top, the steward keys, accounts, the power to frown men into obedience. The chamberlain minds rooms and robes. The butler rules the buttery, the pantler the pantry. The ewery keeps water and towels. The spicery counts what makes food worth eating. The larder swallows meat whole. Below them a river of hands, grooms, pages, laundresses, seamers, spitboys, dairymaids, porters. The usher knows names and the order of bows. The almoner knows poor mouths by parish. The marshal knows horses and men who think they are. You break disguise not by failing a lord, but by disappointing the little gods. Call the butler master. In the pantry, and the pantler will blink like a cat shown a mirror. Carry a ewer wrong, and the ewer will weep salt into his towel and fetch a superior. In monasteries it is worse. The novice master sees posture from a cloister's length, and a false tonsure is a halo of treason under good light. Smells betray what cloth cannot. A true groom is a bridle in human shape. A true cook is onion through and through. You can rub horse on your sleeves and butter into your sleeves and still carry the unwelcome signature of steel knife oil, a whisper of whetstone. The porter at the gate learns pilgrims by the leather of their scrip and the vinegar of old wine. He learns peddlers by spice and rust. He will learn you by the space you make around yourself. A man with business belongs. A man in costume asks permission without opening his mouth. The porter has said, "Welcome to 1,000 legitimate lies," and can spot the one that forgot to bend. Speech is a garment too, and it frays quicker than wool. Masters are, "My lord," where you think "Sir," "Goodman," where you guess "Master." You ask for the buttery and point at the pantry. You say "cellar," when the house says "buttery," because the cellars are for wood, and the wine lives under a different god. You call the chief clerk by his baptismal name, and the room cools a degree, because here he is, Master Robert, to anyone who hopes to eat. You misname the house dog, and the scullion smirks because everyone knows Tib answers only to cheese. A single wrong diminutive makes a corridor stare. A hesitation at a bowed head makes a chamberlain remember that his keys enjoy complaining. People think a disguise is cloth plus courage. It is timing plus detail. You carry a tray not because you need a tray, but because hands that carry have a reason to be anywhere. You choose the hour when the watch changes, or the salt is passed, or the bell calls men to chapel, because movement forgives faces then. You borrow the pace of a man late for the buttery, and the posture of a man who belongs, and the trick of seeing no one. You become a line in a ledger instead of a figure at a door. For 5 minutes. Then the room finishes believing everything else and turns to you. When it turns, you improvise. Lies are tools. Simple, plausible, already half true. You do not arrive as a cousin from away. You arrive as sent from the spicery. And you carry a paper folded like a bill, even if no one reads in that corner of the house. You do not claim to know. You ask for help to take something to somewhere, and you say the name of the someone who never lifts a finger because he enjoys instructing. People love to correct. Let them correct you down the corridor you needed anyway. When you speak, you offer information first. Master Thomas said the pantry door sticks on damp nights, and see whose mouth agrees. Each nod buys a breath. Masks buy time, nothing more. Every seam offers to come apart. The staff notice the buckle you keep adjusting because you hid a blade there, and leather doesn't forgive the weight. The verger sees your cross from the wrong shoulder in the chapel and adds a silent bead to his resentment of amateurs. The falconer looks up at your hands and doesn't see the little scars jesses carve and files your face under lyre. The usher asks which bench my lord prefers this season and watches you drown in a room where seating is warfare. And always, always the scullion moves like water, looks up from the floor you forgot was his kingdom, and decides you are interesting. Interesting people do not last. There are small rescues if you are respectful of the house you're stealing. Keep your eyes where the servants keep theirs low for monks, level for stewards, cheerful for grooms. Let your shoulders carry the memory of buckets even if you're not carrying any. Never block a doorway. Never step between a man and his work unless that man is already paid to ignore you. If someone challenges you with a question that has a title inside it, answer with a task. They wanted the linen changed before prime. Work outranks explanation. If you must name an authority, name one who can't be summoned, like the lord at Hunt or the abbot at Chapter. Accept that you will be seen. Plan not to be recognized twice. Never wear the same lie 2 days in a small place. Change the angle of your walk. Smear your sleeves with the color the room expects. Break the mask yourself before someone else pulls it off. Use the 5 minutes to pass a door, not to earn an hour. 5 minutes is a gift from other people's haste. Spend it like hot coin, and when the 5 minutes burn out as they do, they always do, you do the unheroic thing that keeps you a rumor. You drop the tray. You startle, apologetic and eager to be helpful. And in the muddle of hands and cloth and artificial chaos you are already turning. The way smoke chooses the crack. The way spills find the lowest board. Disguise is a key made of bread. It opens once, crumbles in your pocket, and reminds you, with every soft grain on your palm, that the door you must rely on in the end is the one you measured in the dark, with no one watching. Exit. You learn, early and often, that company is not comfort. It is exposure with a smile. There is no guild where you can hang your trade at the door like a wet cloak and sit among men who speak your dialect of danger. Guilds demand dues and names and attendance at feasts. They keep lists. They store memory. You survive by refusing to be written down. Even the thieves sociable in their way, with taverns they call home and whistles that mean help step wide of your shadow. A thief caught can return to work. A killer caught cannot return to anything. Standing near you is a way to meet a rope early. Even fences prefer their stock unliving and unremarkable. You bring heat, and heat is bad for business. Your isolation, then, isn't a quirk. It is armor stitched in silence. Partners are stories that end badly. 2 men double the pairs of boots someone remembers, and halve the chance that a narrow door remains wide enough. 2 men argue over the moment to leave, and the house always votes with the fool. 2 men divide the purse and multiply the fear. His fear that you'll name him, yours that he'll name you. Your joint fear that the coin isn't worth the 2 separate lives it now has to hide. Hand signals are sweet in theory and sour when panic changes the grammar. You learn to put out the lamp without saying now. You learn that solitude is a blade you keep sharp because nothing else will cut a night as cleanly. Lovers are miracles in other trades. Here they are liabilities that sing. To be known in the soft way is to be traced in the hard way. Bedding makes maps. A favorite inn, a kind landlady, a neighbor who remembers laughter. Lovers notice patterns. You forgot were patterns. Why you sleep with your back to the wall. Why you always wake at the first bell. Why you go still as stone when a cart passes. They ask what the scar under the ribs says, and why your hands are theatre when you talk. The honest ones worry you. The dishonest ones sell you. Both will bury you by accident if they do not do it on purpose. You learn to leave kindness behind you because taking it along writes your end. Friendship is versioned out of you until what remains are exchanges without names, not favors, equivalences. You pay the boy at the gate in twine and story. He pays you with a glance when the watch is thick or thin. You give the laundress vinegar once when she has none, and she gives you a small fact once when you ask none. You never call it a debt, you call it weather. Weather comes and goes. Men live longer that way. The self erodes by practical means. At first you believe names are props. Later you discover faces are props. You keep one for the pantry downcast, carrying a man who knows where knives are kept because he has kept them. Another for the stable, careless, cheerful, always with a story about the last horse you never had. A third for the chapel, mild, tired, eyes that accept unfriendly benches. You rotate them as winter rotates coats. One day you catch yourself smiling the wrong smile for the wrong door and realize you have become a stack of masks, none of which is yours. It is safer that way, and it kills something honest you did not have time to bury with words. Corners become habits. You sit so you can see two doors and the big window, and the serving girl learns to set your drink where your hand will be, not where the table thinks it should live. You put your back to the timber post, because timber does not lie. You arrive with the noon crowd, because individuals disappear in busy hours. You leave at the bell that makes men change jobs, not at the one that makes them change souls. When you must wait, you choose door watching over prayer, because doors tell you who you are. A door opening and closing without you in it is a victory you can drink to without raising the cup. The world, noticing your corners, calls you wary. It does not see you counting. You count floorboards from threshold to hearth, so that when someone stands, you can map their stop in your head before they arrive. You count the beats between bell and watchman's all's well, and learn an entire town's breathing. You count the knives on the dresser and the hands that lifted them, and whether those hands are the hands that put them back. You keep count because arithmetic is the only prayer that has ever answered you. You stop sleeping. Then you learn to sleep like a cat under judgment, half in, half out, claws filed on waking. Sleep is the enemy that comes in peace. It offers tomorrow at the price of failing tonight. Refuse the bargain and you die slow. Accept it and you die sudden. So you bargain by inches. The head against the wall, the hat over the face, the blade under the folded cloak, the heart counting itself tame. You hide rest in the cracks of other people's labor. 5 breaths while the carts turn, 7 while the porter argues a fee, 11 while the bell rings. Prime and men bow, and you do not because you are counting. You cultivate a look that says, already spoken for. It is not arrogance. It is a courtesy to trouble. Trouble likes men who glance like questions. You learn to glance like errands. When addressed, you answer with work. I'm sent to fetch the ewer. The pantry wants the keys. Father says the incense is low. Work runs smoother through a house than explanation. Explanation tangles. Work flows. Flow is a river under a city, and you are happiest when you are water. All the small refusals add up to a life without witnesses. You don't drink to drunkenness because your tongue's loyalty is poor. You don't gamble because losing buys attention, and winning buys attention's uncle. You don't sing because melody is memory, and someone will carry it in their pocket and spend it in the wrong room. You don't dance because dancers become stories. You don't argue because victory binds the vanquished to your face, and they will go away and remember it until remembering finds a use. The rooms you inhabit shrink as your habits grow. You choose inns with 2 exits, and rooms with ladders in the corner. You choose churches with porches deep enough for a man to hide inside piety. You choose markets where the cry is so loud that a name would have to shout to reach a constable. The places you avoid are cleaner than your conscience. Tidy yards where a stranger's shadow writes itself on neat paving, meal. Times in small villages where one more bowl is a census. Funerals where every grief wants witnesses, and you cannot bear to be one of them. Once, long ago, you told the truth about yourself to someone. You learned how quickly it becomes a chain. So now you tell softer truths that cannot be gripped. You collect not people, but habits in others that will save you. The baker with the errand boy who always runs, The ostler who cannot abide a tethered knot too tight, the clerk who keeps two quills and drops the worse one when he's angry. These are the hinges in a day. You grease them with coin or courtesy, and they swing without squeaking when the night wants to shut. Even thieves keep their distance, because the tale told about you is sharper than your blade. They think you bring gallows with you like fleas, and they are not entirely wrong. When a constable cannot catch a rumour, he catches the nearest man with bad friends. Thieves survive by being in groups when it suits them, and alone when it doesn't. You falsify that rhythm. You are alone when groups would be safer and invisible when a chorus might drown you. They do not hate you. They merely prefer their odds without you in the sum. There are moments rare as mercy, when the isolation feels like safety and the safety feels like grace. A window lit by late sun in a town where no one knows your shoes. A baker's daughter laughing at a joke you did not tell because laughter was in the air and you were passing through it unhurt. A dog that doesn't notice you. You learn to take those crumbs and call it a meal. The hunger goes quiet for an hour. Then the bell rings and you remember that every man's time is measured by different hands, and yours are always counting exits. You will be tempted, sometimes, to reach for warmth, to give your name, only the little one you had as a boy, to sit with your back not to a wall but to a friend, to sleep a full sleep like rivers do when winter forgives them. You do it once, maybe twice. The sky doesn't fall, but a week later a porter says, "You were here before," and a month later a taverner says, "You like the corner table," and a season later a man you never noticed knows where you sit. Love is a stake you hammer into your own road, so others may tether you. You walk on. What remains of you is useful and not much else. You are a shape that arranges rooms into advantages, a patience that makes corridors behave, a courtesy that keeps men thinking of their chores instead of your face. You are a habit of leaving. If it sounds lonely, that is because it is. If it sounds survivable, that is because you have made an art of surviving. And art, like work, does not require witnesses, only practice. You don't perfect the art of vanishing by learning to be unseen. You perfect it by learning to be forgettable, to enter and leave a place so that later, when the story is told, the teller thinks there must have been someone, but no, not anyone they could name. That is the only applause this trade allows, and you take it where you can, in silence and in getting to the next door before anyone writes you down. Failure buys spectacle, not just a rope, not just iron. It buys a stage and an audience, and men who have waited their whole lives to learn the names of the parts. You don't go quietly if you fail, you go public. The square fills with apprentices and grandmothers and dogs with opinions. The beadle reads a charge that sounds like a sermon and a shopping list at once. The parson stands to the side with a face like winter. The sheriff checks knots, checks fees, checks that his dignity is visible from the balconies. You are made to explain yourself in a voice loud enough to help frighten other people into honesty. They strap you to a frame with a name that rhymes with a joke, or wheel you through streets that never gave you bread until now, when they give you stones. You are their theatre and their devotion both. You learn that the worst part of failure isn't dying, it's contributing. Success, by contrast, is undramatic and very fast. It is breathing you don't have time for. The moment after the job is a fuse you've already lit. You don't stand over a body and admire geometry. You are algebra with legs, solving for distance. A good plan assumes you will have no attention to spare for thinking, because you won't. Doors will be heavy, air will be thin, and your pulse will be counting loudly enough to be heard by God and dogs. Success is sprinting through a map you drew yesterday and dirtied on purpose so no one would guess its value. You pre-plan exits the way other men plan marriages. Not one, not two, three, and a wild. The wild exit is the one that makes you disgusted to write it down. The one through the tallow chandler's yard or over the midden with the plague rumours. You never choose the romantic route roofs, unless roofs are the only things that accept you. You stash a cap, a cloak, a second story under a brewhouse bench. You pay a ferryman twice, once to forget you, once to remember someone else at the same hour tomorrow. You notice where the chains run that lift the portcullis. You kiss a coin and hide it in the joint of the second bridge plank, because coin is faster than wit when a gate wants a reason. And you count the minutes it takes the watch to move from all's well to lockdown. Every town has a time. You live by it. The city will close around you like a book shuts on a pressed flower. Gates swing down, chains bite. Porters discover the poetry of no. A sketch will appear on a door within the hour. The nose wrong, the hat too tall, your eyes stolen from a saint, but close enough for trouble. The crier will cry. The porter at the precinct will remember your gate because it annoyed him yesterday. And if you were hired by a man who understands thrift, a cleaner has already been hired to collect the cleaner. That is, to erase you as line item and liability. You are running from the city, the client, and the narrative. So here is what the first 10 minutes looked like when everything after is a negotiation with breath. 0 o'clock. The act is an absence, no flourish, no second strike. Linen gathers itself into the shape of sleep forever, and you are already turned toward the door you opened one finger's width ago. Your blade is skin again at your ribs, not in your hand. Hands are guilty, ribs are human. 001. The latch answers with the sound you bought yesterday by rubbing tallow on its complaint. You move in the night patrol cadence you learned on the wall. Step, breath, stillness, lie. A dog in the gallery thuffs. You borrow the cough you practiced and become a servant with a cold. 002. Stairs are promises you make to your knees. You keep to the newel where twine and time have slicked the inner curve. Feet whisper, not slap. You count the turnings. 1, 2, 3 door on the left that breathes warm. 4, 5 tapestry that tried to kiss your shoulder yesterday and will not get the chance tonight. 003. The postern you paid for opens inward, as all betrayals do. Your peg wedges it smiling shut behind you. The yard air is colder than your plan and therefore honest. You are now on stone that belongs to the sky, and the sky keeps secrets better than halls. 004. Alley. You become ash on your sleeve, on your cheek, because a man with ash belongs to kitchens, and no one stops kitchens. You take the left, you swore you wouldn't, because the right has a drunk who will remember a hood, but not why. 005. The brewhouse door is a gift you prepaid with a story about your master's thirst. Heat hits, hops cover you, steam eats your shape. You swap cloaks at the peg where you hung one earlier. Your heartbeat is a blacksmith. You let him work, you do not ask for art. 006. Out past the cool ship and onto the lane where wagon ruts herd men. The cleaner will aim for the places a runner must pass, so you do not run there. You run next to them, shoulders whispering apologies to Brick. You lose hat and gain cap from the hook you bribed a tallow boy to ignore. Your silhouette becomes a different story. 007 Barses. A corner you hate because the world ends before you get to see the next world. You soft collide with a porter carrying stools. You become furniture, sorry and helpful. And out of that act you win 3 seconds and a courtesy that turns his eyes elsewhere. Your hands smell of chair, not steel. 008. You reach the horse trough that knows other men's sins and use it for yours. Hands in, blood out, face changed to wet. Water is disguise that costs nothing and explains everything. A girl laughs at a different man's joke. That is the only blessing you get. 009. Market lane. Stalls shuttered, but ropes still across. You duck under, not through. Through leaves fibers. Under leaves nothing. The watch will take the broad street because broad streets are for spectacle. You take the alley that smells like fish and the memory of summer. 010. A gate in the wall where the river thinks about being useful. The guard knows 2 kinds of traffic at this hour: sacks and excuses. You are a sack with an excuse inside it. The coin at the bridge joint buys you indifference. Nothing opens faster than a gate that believes it is none of its business. What follows is weather. You feel it in your bones, pressure dropping, danger turning to rain. It does not end. 011, 013. You walk, not run, because running writes your face in the mind like a rubric. 014. You turn into the tallow yard, because the smell ruins tracking and dignity both. 015. You use your wild exit, the one you hate over the night soil cart, apologizing to your soul because your life is worth more than your pride. 016. A man steps from a doorway and says the wrong polite thing. Cleaner. You do the right impolite thing, drop, shove, go under his reach, become a gap the lane forgot it had. He will tell a story about your cowardice. He will tell it to no one who matters. At 017, your lungs write to say they resign. You negotiate a brief extension with a lie. You are a carter late for the malt house. You are a husband late for penance. You are an anything that makes a watchman want to go back to warm. At 018, a bell rings the wrong hour because a boy pulled it for drama. The city notices and begins to lock by habit. It will not lock you if you are already where you shouldn't be. By 020, you have reached the place before the place. Never the rendezvous, always the shadow of it. You check what you can without looking like a man who checks. Are there too many footprints in the mud where no one with boots belongs? Is there a second smoke in a yard where one stove lives? Do you hear quiet men breathing like they've rehearsed it? If yes, you do not attend your own killing. You attend to leaving. The purse, if any purse, will be paid for by a man who understands that later is theatre for fools. If not, then you eat the cost, and the hunger, and the lesson, and move the meeting to a day you will live to keep. Some nights you make the gate before the city can decide you're the story. Some nights you burrow in instead into a church's porch where rain becomes other sins, into a hayloft that lies for you because hay wants everyone to be warm. And some nights you cannot find out at all. You must find through a crowd becoming a hue and cry, through an alley that feels like the mouth of a trap, through a watchpost where the officer has a face full of rules and a bladder to match. You learn to weigh men's inconveniences. You cultivate being the lesser one. The sketch goes up by dawn, inked by a clerk who has never seen your face and never will, but will swear to it anyway. Your client, the kind who reads accounts like romances, will send a second envelope across town to a man with a tidy beard and a terrible price for housekeeping. If you keep the appointment, you die thriftily. If you don't, you live expensively for another week. Your profit was never the coin. It was the daylight you buy with it. This is why the rule sits in your mouth like a prayer you've bitten. Success is sprinting. Failure is theatre. You were hired to make a man into quiet. You live by making your own noise so small that even the city can't be bothered to repeat it. If that sounds inglorious, good. Glory is a way to get noticed. You prefer exits. They say you turned into smoke. They say you looked at a man and his breath forgot him. They say you whispered in the ear of a cow, and it gave blood instead of milk. That you walked through doors the way mist walks through hedges. That dogs would not bark at you because your shadow made them old. The village needs its monsters to be convenient, and you fit the hour's need. Assassins are not just criminals in stories like these. They are shapeshifters, hexers, bad weather in boots. Once the tale decides you are sorcery, the rest of the world becomes props torches for bonfires, ropes for justice, bells for permission. Crowds don't think, they collect. One mouth repeats what the last mouth wanted to be true, and none of them remembers who first said it because remembering would make someone responsible. You will hear your own life recited by men who never met you, as if they had, in a tone that makes strangers nod. He has a mark on his wrist that moves, someone says. He put salt on his tongue and spat needles, says another. The baker swears your eyes were yellow like the devil's cat. The tanner says you smelled of grave wax. They can't describe your hands, but they can describe the omen that followed you across the green. Proof is unnecessary when fear feels satisfying. Even constables, who should be the vocabulary of order, traffic in stories when stories are easier than work. The hue and cry is both law and theatre. One shout becomes 10, becomes 100. Doors fly open for a cause that arrived without evidence. There are rules for this, neighbours must join. Men must run, but rules bend to the pace of gossip, and gossip runs in bare feet. Parish bells turn hearsay into duty, a single toll for fire, a peal without pattern for danger, a hammered, breathless clangour that means come now. Bells cross fields faster than pigeons. Their sound collects witnesses before facts can. By the time the beadle has his dignity laced, 6 boys have already furnished your description from a face none of them saw. Rumour travels at the speed of metal struck and lungs willing. Superstition does what armies cannot. It abolishes proportion. A dropped cup is an omen. A sick child becomes your fault. Hail in summer arrives as evidence that you have tied knots in the weather. If a lord dies of a winter chill, it was poison. If he lives, it was your spell that failed, and therefore you are angrier now. Men who never spoke to you swear they saw you walking backwards at dusk, because that is how devils are supposed to remember the road to hell. The priest does not endorse this, exactly. He just doesn't fight it, because fear keeps some men honest, and he has funerals to manage. In places where saints' bones sleep uneasily, even a stranger's quiet is a provocation. Poison, your supposed sacrament, is mostly story. There are powders that hurry the blood or slow it, seeds that spin the head, leaves that teach the heart to miscount, minerals that make the belly a kiln. There are also recipes copied from fools who like to write their courage down, and from charlatans who sold certainty the way tinkers sell miracle pans. You have no scales fit for truth. You have a pinch and a curse and a shaking hand in a busy kitchen. Heat lies. Too much and the dose dies before the eater meets it. Too little and the eater meets you. Very conscious, and now very careful. Kitchen girls stir sunwise because their grandmothers did. A taster slurps a spoon and decides by tradition. A dog noses the platter and tells a better story with one bark than any apothecary could tell with a shelf of jars. Dosage is guesswork. A man who eats like a boar needs more. A woman who eats like a bird needs none. A fasting day ruins all your mathematics. Wine masks bitterness only until the steward decides to be pious. Ale hides nothing if the brewer minds his work. Silver spoons do not blacken on command. Toadstones don't scream when danger nears. A candle's gutter means only that someone left the door ajar. What actually works is mundane and ugly. Arsenical dust in the hand-washing basin, not the cup. Collyrium smeared on a purse, not for the man who will pay you then reach. A skin bite from aconite rubbed into a ring. Anything that asks a kitchen to be predictable is a poem no house will recite twice. Guilds cannot help you because there are none. Tasthood, if it exists, is a man with good judgment and bad teeth who knows when stew tastes oddly of almond or stone. He will taste until he dies, or until he lives long enough to demand double and better portions, at which point he becomes a reason to avoid cleverness entirely. Dogs are surer. They don't reason, they refuse. Houses that fear witchery keep dogs. Houses that fear whispered knives keep two. You can step over a mistrustful man. You cannot step over a dog without losing something you need. So why does poison keep appearing in the stories? Because it is a kind of magic even the rational enjoy hating. It requires no witnesses at the sacred moment. It lets men say they were not overpowered but outwitted, a sentence that saves face while selling fear. And stories prefer invisible hands. They are cheaper to film inside a skull than to pay extra men to swing swords on the green. But in the work, poison is unreliability dressed as cunning. If you live long enough, you reserve it for knots and purses, not for plates. The bonfire waits for the wrong kind of failure. Not the missed blade, but the court attempt that turns a conspiracy into morality play. Fire is the town's confession of its own fright. It has nothing to do with you until you are tied above it. They will call it purgation. They will say light cleanses. They will cheer in relief. The only thing that burns truly is doubt, and it burns out of them, not you. You will contribute heat, and a smell answers no one, and the crowd will go home convinced their world is tidier. But the worst outcome is not flame or wheel or rope. It is erasure. You are forgotten on purpose. Your client chooses it out of thrift. The city prefers it out of vanity. The scribes do not write your name because names give shape to fear. They write a certain man. They write a shadow. They write it is said. The watch posts a sketch so incompetent it could be anybody, and therefore everyone. In a week, the paper fades. In a month, a new notice smothers it on the door. In a season, no one recalls precisely what worried them, only that something once did. Plausible deniability is not a phrase anyone here uses, but they practice it with the grace of saints. A tale without a teller can be told anywhere. Erasure is a policy disguised as forgetting. It keeps patrons clean. It keeps law from admitting that law could not find a man who stood 3 feet from its nose. It keeps the parish from acknowledging how quickly it would murder a stranger to feel righteous for an evening. You become the civic equivalent of a draft under a door. Felt, cursed, unexamined. Men prefer tidy endings to true ones. A rope provides a tidy, a grave without a name provides the tidier. And if they can reach neither, a story that names no one does nicely fear without indemnity. For you, erasure is both salvation and insult. Salvation because breath loves anonymity. Insult because a human heart, even a battered one, wants to be seen. You have done something enormous and ugly and precise, and the world has decided to misremember it into fog. Your payment arrives late and light. Your existence arrives never. The client smiles at dinner the next night and says, "The matter resolved itself." And no one asks how, because everyone is grateful not to know. You walk through the market unheard, which is victory, and undescribed, which is all the victory you get. Bells will still ring, gossip will still run, dogs will still test the stew. The world keeps its habits even when its stories change. You learn to live in the pauses between bell and bell, where a rumor has not yet ripened into rule. You learn to ignore the versions of yourself that strangers enjoy retelling, because arguing with them only adds your breath to their script. You learn that the best proof of your presence is absence, written so neatly that even the clerk who loves ink cannot find a place to put you. Superstition will go on naming you wizard. Poison will go on being more legend than knife. And erasure will go on performing the domestic miracle of keeping the important people comfortable. Your answer to all three remains the same: leave. Not because flight is noble, but because staying makes you into the thing they need you to be. You are not a marvel, you are a method. The sooner you are elsewhere, the sooner the story tells itself without your face in it. And if, on a winter evening, you hear a bell begin to hurry and watch heads turn like flowers to a sun that is really iron, you will already be walking towards the hour that has no audience. That is the only alchemy you trust. The transformation of a man into a rumor, and then into nothing at all. There is no ending that looks like hearth smoke and a good chair. There is no cottage with a south-facing wall and a pear tree that bothers to fruit on your birthday. There is no fishing, no modest pride in neat hedges, no neighbors who say, "He keeps himself to himself," and mean it kindly. There is only the slow fade you plan and the faster end your client prefers. Between those two, you walk until your souls forget your first name. Clients are thrifty with fear. They spend it well. A man who has used you once has learned something precise about the cost of silence and how cheaply it can be purchased with a second purse turned inside out and tied to a different hand. The cleaner who was paid to tidy the deed will meet a cleaner who was paid to tidy you. Both will be cheaper than gratitude. Men who can write their names with titles attached do not like owing favors to shadows. They like closing. They like done. Never trust anyone isn't a proverb in your world. It is air. You breathe it or you don't wake. You try, sometimes, to retire by sideways means. You keep a name that looks like a shoe left under a bed. Easy to overlook, easy to forget. You move to villages with more sheep than sons, and buy blades that cut hedges, not throats. You rent a room from a widow who thinks you are the sort of quiet that happens after a war. You learn the names of weathers because talking about weather is what passes for kinship where men have few choices. You offer your back at harvest, and your hands at lambing, and your purse at the ale bench when the miller's luck goes sour, because money without history makes you acceptable. It almost works. Then memory remembers its job. The church warden wants your parish of origin for his book. The constable wants to know why you don't drink on feast days. The parish clerk has a cousin in a town where once a sketch hung, and your jaw looked familiar from the wrong angle. A boy wants a story about soldiers, and you do not tell him one, and that becomes a kind of story anyway. You fix a fence too well, and a farmer says you hold a hammer like a blade. You flinch at a dog's bark or the crack of a cart whip or the sound of a latch lifted carelessly, and the flinch is a signature. You are not from here, and places that are not yours notice. Taxes find you. Musters find you, when war needs men who already know how to stand still while fear has a tantrum. The reeve counts heads and acres, and finds a man with no relatives and no debts and no stories difficult to seat at his table, even on paper. In towns you used to vanish by being one more coat in a crowd. In hamlets you are a coat with a history that refuses to appear. Countryside anonymity is a myth told by city men. Villages remember boots. Your body insists on telling tales you'd rather keep locked. You hold your breath when doors open because doors are questionnaires. You put your back to walls in churches because old habits outlive new intentions. You wake before bells because bells like to surprise men who have sinned. Gentleness becomes hard work. Children ask questions with eyes that have not yet learned suspicion, and you answer in sentences that contain no edges. This is the nearest you come to peace. A morning where your hands do not shake as you tie a pig's rope. An evening where you hear a lad laugh, and it doesn't sound like a watchman finding his stride. The mind keeps souvenirs it did not ask permission to take. Not melodrama, nothing anyone would pay to see. Just the little dirty facts that live at the back of the nose and the edge of the teeth, metal smell, lamp fat, breath caught in a curtain. They come at odd hours and you ride them out like weather. You do not narrate yourself. You sand a piece of oak and call it patience. You stand at a gate and listen to rain count to 100 and call it penance. You learn to say, "I'll fetch water," when the room begins to tilt, and no one learns anything except that you are useful. There are men who try a different ending. The confession at a quiet priory. The robe that hides a life. The garden that grows onions and forgetfulness. Priors are used to hearing sins that walk. Some will accept yours without wanting to untie the knots. But even stones have ears. A new brother who rises too easily in the night, who carries keys without wanting them, who listens to footsteps like an accountant listens to sums. He is a story in a house that prefers psalms. The wrong kind of charity draws pilgrims who ask questions that are not about saints. And there is always the letter that arrives from a patron whose memory is better than yours. Brother so-and-so is a man of discernment, it will say, and discernment is a spear thrown from a safe distance. Or you try the soldier's ending. Join a captain who likes a blade that keeps its own counsel. Trade one set of orders for another, one kind of sprinting for a drum that tells you when to move. It buys you seasons and scars, and a grave that could have belonged to anyone. The work is cleaner, in that it admits itself. The pay is regular until it isn't. The death is honest, until your commanding officer borrows you for an evening's necessity, and you recognize the shape of a room that does not want to forget you. You leave again, and even your leaving looks borrowed. Sometimes the client finds you anyway, even after the hedges and tides and the careful years of not being an anecdote. He finds you because men who tidy offices keep lists, and lists like to feel complete. He finds you because another man sold a name for a debt that could not be paid, and your name was cheap because you made it yourself, and you made it too well. He finds you because you sighed in the wrong place when a story was told badly, and someone who enjoys bad stories decided to punish you for your taste. He writes to a sheriff, to a cousin, to a bishop's man with a tidy beard. The letter says very little, the purse that follows says the rest. The village will call it justice because justice is a good story and the truth is merely administrative. And so you go again. Pack small, leave no goodbyes that can be weaponized. Pay the widow 3 months' rent and an apology. Shake the ostler's hand because he never asked you anything. Kindness deserves a brave salute. Kiss no one. Take the road that looks boring. Boring roads have fewer heroes on them, and heroes are a kind of police. Walk until you are a new problem for a new clerk with a blunt quill. This is the audit, then the cold one people say they want until they hear it totaled. You wanted to be invisible. You have achieved forgettable. You wanted safety. You have achieved delay. You wanted enough. You have achieved barely. Your victories are mundane. Leaving a room before anyone can decide who to be. Failing to interest a dog. Making a gate broad enough to open. Your failures would be spectacular if you allowed them an audience. You don't. You wouldn't last, people say, and they are right, because lasting would require a community willing to hold you without asking for receipts, and your trade printed its receipts on other people's nights. Lasting would require luck without habit, grace without craft, a world that forgives without needing to know what it forgives. You have none of those. What you have is a practice that keeps turning itself into tomorrow. There is a small human moment that does not fit the ledger, but deserves its inch of ink. Once, in a lane where the wind had made a friend of the dust, a boy dropped a loaf. He looked at it like a lost battle. You picked it up, brushed it, handed it back, and said, "If the crust's dirtier than the road, you're rich." He laughed, the clean kind, the kind that leaves no hooks. No one saw. No one thanked you. It was nothing. It was the kind of nothing you can live on for a week. No retirement plan then. Only root and habit, the ritual of leaving well, the refusal to be present at your own variety of ending. If the world insists on telling a story about you, let it be the quiet one. A man who stayed polite, who kept to the edge of the road, who never asked a door to open twice, who carried no more than he could explain, who moved on before the village had to decide whether to like him. You will not be missed. That is the point. You will not be remembered. That is the point. You will be somewhere else the day the bells decide to hurry. That too is the point. You carry the rule forward because rules are lighter than regrets. Never trust anyone. Never trust yourself near pride. Never attend the ending. Never speak louder than you're leaving. If you're fortunate, the last thing you see is an ordinary hedge, and the last thing you hear is nothing important, and the last thing you think is that quiet, hard-won, unaffordable, uncelebrated was worth the price you paid for it with names. You go on, not because there is a promise at the end of the lane, but because stopping is a kind of announcement, and you do not make announcements. You pass fields that have never heard of you, and inns that never will. Somewhere behind you a drawer shuts on a list with your old name crossed out. Somewhere ahead of you a door lifts on its latch, not because it has been waiting for you, but because doors lift. That will have to be enough. Turn the page and the air changes. We leave alleyways and gatehouses for mountains and river mist, northwest to Epirus, where oaks talk in wind and kings claim their blood from Achilles. Before she was the woman Rome would whisper about, she was Myrtilea, Molossian princess from a country that bred hard horses and harder pragmatists. The Epirotes wore their myths like mail. the Aeacid line that traced itself to Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, Dodona's oak, where Zeus answered in leaves, women who knew old songs that did not ask Athenian permission. It is in that landscape we first meet her not at a loom, but at a shrine. The rites around her were not the calm geometry of a temple peristyle. They were ecstatic, nocturnal, close to the skin Dionysian processions, ivy crowns, the drum that outruns the pulse, the moment when worship stops being polite and becomes an arrival. Later writers, men, most of them, with styluses sharpened by scandal, will say she kept snakes in her chamber, that they slid across her shoulders like jewelry alive, that even a king might find a serpent where he expected a wife. Perhaps she did. The snake in Greek hands is never only fear. It is chthonic wisdom, household protection, rebirth, the shock of Godhead entering the room without knocking. Or perhaps she did not, and it was an old slander given new perfume, the favorite smear against women who refused to be domesticated. Either way, the idea of Olympias began here, a woman whose piety was not porcelain, but dangerous. She will not keep the name Myrtale for long. Names in royal houses are costumes fitted to the drama. Some traditions call her Polyxena for a time, others Olympias, a name she may have taken when Philip's horses won at Olympia, or as a mark of a vow, or simply because victory finds new syllables for itself. What matters is that the name sticks, and it carries weather. Olympias has thunder in it. It sounds like a statement you have to stand up to. Picture Samothrace, steep, green and secretive, a sanctuary of the great gods where sailors sought safety and kings sought legitimacy. Philip II of Macedon, already brilliant, already dangerous, not yet a legend, comes to be initiated. He arrives ironclad in intent, leaves with a mystery stitched under his skin. Somewhere between ritual and dawn, he meets her. Not an Athenian ideal with neat ankles, but a presence. The story they later tell is simple. He sees, he wants, he weds. The story beneath the story is better. Philip understands that Epirus offers him more than a wife. It offers connection to Achilles' myth, to Dodona's god, to a western flank of Greece that respects strength expressed without apology. Olympias sees more than a king. She sees a road for her line. The marriage dated to around 357 BCE as a policy as much as a passion. Macedon is a baroque engine of factions. Epirus is a knot of cousins and old grudges. A wedding ties them to a common breath. But no one in their world resists ornamenting politics with prophecy. The night has omens prepared like props. Olympias, they say, dreams a thunderbolt entering her womb, then a flame that spreads without burning. Philip dreams that a lion seals his bride's belly with a ring. Snakes coil at the bed's foot, and are either literal, symbolic, or libel, depending which historian's eyebrows you prefer. Plutarch will write it with a sort of fascinated caution. Other writers will lean in, greedy for the detail that makes a woman monstrous, and therefore memorable. We should read them with salt. Male authors in comfortable generations after the fact were skilled at turning female agency into theatre excess, witchcraft, hysteria, so that power looked like sin when worn by a woman. Still, even skepticism must leave room for belief. Olympias believed fiercely, usefully, that the gods attend. When she prays, what follows isn't pallor, it is planning. The marriage produces a child whose conception will be curated like a relic while he is yet unborn. If you intend to raise a king who will stride through history like a lawsuit, it helps to seed the narrative early. The thunderbolt myth says Zeus himself visited her. The Egyptian gloss will later align the father with Ammon in his Libyan oasis. Philip, it is hinted, suspects he is only stepfather to destiny. Whether any of it is true is almost unimportant. It is useful, and in royal houses useful things are made true by repetition. Olympias brings Epirus with her into Macedon. The smell of oak, smoke, and goat hair. The calm insolence of someone who knows she is sacred to herself before she is wife to anyone. the structural manners of a court where queens are not furniture. Macedon, for its part, is loud with spears. It eats metal for breakfast. The women at Pella are no mean stitches of politics themselves. Olympias learns the corridors fast. She keeps ritual near Theasoi of Dionysius, nights of music that probably offended someone and certainly steadied her, and she keeps score. Philip is not a one-wife man. His marriages are heraldry in motion. Olympias refuses to be background. The baby arrives and is named Alexander. If you're looking for restraint in the omens, you won't find it. A temple burns at Ephesus the same night Artemis, supposedly too busy attending a birth at Pella to save her own house. A male historian, with a twinkle, writes that such conflagration simply cleared the stage for a world conqueror. Another, with a sniff, calls it coincidence dressed as flattery. The boy's education will later be given to Aristotle. His training to men who understand how a spear orders a life. But the setting, belongs to his mother. She braids God into his cradle. That is not superstition, it is statecraft. To say Olympias was religious is to miss the way religion functioned here. In Macedon, as in Epirus, sacred practice is a technology of legitimacy. The king is not priest, but he must be plausible to gods and men. The queen is not oracle, but she must convince the household that the door between mortal and divine hinges on command. The ecstatic rites, so often described with a smirk, were besides their heat networks, women's alliances, information, obligation. When later enemies call her Bacchante and waggle eyebrows at the thought of women and wine, they are shrinking a political instrument to a moral anecdote. Male pens do that. They also love snake anecdotes because snakes are shorthand for sex and fear, a 2-for-1 bargain in misogyny. What of Philip? This is not a puppet and puppeteer comedy. He is older, unsentimental, with a mind like a siege engine. He sees in Olympias a counterpart as well as a risk. He will marry others. He will invite catastrophe into his own bedchamber by wedding a pure-blooded Macedonian heiress later. But for now he takes the story of Olympias seriously enough to let it lace his own. A husband who jokes too loudly about godly paternity ends up with a son who doesn't need him. A husband who scorns a wife's ritual sets himself against a kind of power court's fear because they cannot enumerate it. Philip is clever. He gives the omens room to breathe. By placing our attention here on rites, serpents, and prophecy, we are not endorsing every embroidery. We are acknowledging the stage on which a particular life will be played. Olympias steps onto it, not as ornament but as author, writing in gestures, feasts, vigils, alliances. The child in her arms will be the most famous solution to the problem of how far a man can go before the world refuses. She intends to answer, Father. The marriage bed at Samothrace becomes a datum, the dream of a thunderbolt, a footnote weaponized into fate. The snake, whether alive, talismanic, or imaginary, an emblem of a woman who keeps old powers close and makes them serve her present. If you strip the legend back to timber, what remains is still formidable. A Molossian princess who understood the grammar of gods and men, a Macedonian king who saw the value of dangerous piety, a union that minted a story before it minted a coin. Call it credulity, if you like. Better to call it construction, the careful assembly of a myth that a boy could carry like armor. We will watch that armor dent, shine, and finally crack. But here, at the beginning, listen to the drum and the oak and the sea's breath on Samothrace. A woman closes her eyes and chooses her name. A man opens his and chooses his queen. Somewhere, a scribe sharpens his stylus for the day he will make her monstrous. For the moment, she is only necessary. Alexander stirs. The room is full of human air and the metallic whisper of a future sharpening itself. Olympias watches her son and thinks in plural, gods, omens, kings, wars. She is not a saint. She is not a witch. She is a mother with a plan, and that is always a frightening thing when the plan points at the world. A Macedonian palace was not a household so much as a permanent campaign under a roof. Men sharpened each other the way whetstones sharpen knives. Philip's virtue, if you can call it that, was to keep the noise pointed outwards. His vice was polygamy turned into policy. Each marriage braided a frontier into the bed linen. Illyrian, Thessalian, Epirote, and at last Cleopatra Eurydice, a Macedonian of high birth whose very name rang like a claim. In a court where loyalty moved like iron filings in wine, always swirling, always subject to the next magnet, this last union reordered the glass. Cleopatra was young, well-born and kin to Atalus, one of Philip's useful hard men. She was also Macedonian to the bone. That mattered. Olympias, Molossian by birth, had brought genealogies and gods. Cleopatra brought local blood that soothed old nobles who still found the king a little too Thessalian in his tastes and a little too international in his ambitions. If Cleopatra bore a son, that child would be pure, in the vocabulary of the men who sat nearest the wine mixing bowl and nearest the gates. Alexander, for all the thunderbolts ascribed to his cradle, suddenly looked like a prince whose mother had the wrong address. The court strain snapped in public at a wedding feast wine, song, a man with too much rank and too little sense. Atalus rose and toasted Philip, praying loudly for a legitimate Macedonian heir. The insult walked across the table on its own legs. Alexander's mother had been insulted. Alexander's claim had been insulted. Alexander himself was no longer required to pretend he hadn't heard. He flung a cup. Words flew like spears. Philip, drunk and more mortal than usual, reached for a sword and lurched. He fell sprawling between benches like any tavern fool. Alexander's reply cold. Poisonous has been polished by tellers ever since. Here is the man who would cross from Europe into Asia, and he cannot cross from one couch to another. It was the kind of line that nails a moment into a future historian's page. It was also a declaration of war inside a family. From that night, Olympias and Alexander became inconvenient in the one place where convenience is law. She withdrew to Epirus's strategic retreat, not sulk where her own kin and shrines gave her depth to breathe. He went elsewhere, half exile, half maneuver. Macedon watched its weather change. Philip was still king, still a maker of kings in other men's houses, still preparing the greatest of his projects, the crossing into Asia. But he had lit a fire under his own roof and left it smouldering, trusting in habit and officers to keep it from taking. He could not afford a prince whose face reminded every courtier of Atalus's words, nor a wife whose rites could make a house feel crowded with gods. Here it helps to name the rules everyone understood, even if no one wrote them down. Macedonian succession was not neat primogeniture, the way later courts like to pretend. Kingship was a right of the Argead blood, affirmed by the armia, a rough consent, weaponed and vocal, that could be more decisive than any cradle. Being the eldest helped. Being adult helped more. Being Macedonian by both parents helped in the eyes of men who favored horses over metaphysics. Polygamy multiplied claimants and their mothers. Campaigns multiplied the army's love for whichever prince's name had just been shouted in victory. If a king named a successor, it mattered. If the companions and infantry cheered the name at the right hour, it mattered more. In that grammar, Cleopatra Eurydice's womb was a political engine. Olympias's was an accomplished fact. Alexander's youth was both asset and charge sheet. Philip did what kings do when their house mutters. He married again, openly, ceremonially, turning personal preference into a banner you have to salute if you like your breakfast unpoisoned. He also arranged another marriage, his daughter Cleopatra, not to be confused, to Alexander of Epirus, Olympias's brother. It was clever in the way ice is clever, smooth, bright, treacherous. The union made Epirus a partner on paper, even as Olympias sulked in its hills. It placed a family smile across a political grimace. The wedding would be held at Aigai, the old royal capital, with all the blare and polish Philip loved. The day of splendor arrived in 336 BCE. Processions, purple, statues of the 12 set up like a play the gods themselves might attend. Philip in white, unarmed, radiant with foregone conclusions. He had spent 20 years battering Greece into a shape that would let him point it at Persia. He had spent the last two learning to make that seem inevitable. He walked between guards who loved him and a crowd that wanted to be close to inevitabilities. Then a bodyguard named Pausanias stepped out and stabbed him. Everything after is wind in corridors. Pausanias was taken or cut down, depending which version you prefer. His grievance, if you request a tidy cause, was personal outrage inadequately avenged. He had been abused. He had appealed to the king. The king had patched the matter with honors instead of justice, and honor is a poor poultice when men like Atalus are involved. That story is plausible. Plausibility is not the same as truth. The instant Philip fell, the palace became a calculus written by frightened men with fast hands. Who benefits? Alexander, called at once. Olympias, whispered by those who had always found her snakes too comfortable. Persia, muttered by Greeks who had learned to blame the East for everything except their own failures. Other wives, other sons, other officers. Olympias's enemies embroidered the moment with the industry of spiders. They will later say she crowned the assassin's grave, or that she placed a wreath on it with a smile too calm. They will say she wrote to someone at the right hour with the wrong advice. They will say she collected the bodies of rivals' children as if they were debts. We should be as cautious here as in Samothrace. The male pens that made her monstrous at the marriage bed were never likely to make her innocent at a murder. What we can say is that Olympias did not faint. Alexander did not dither. Macedon chose with the speed of a soldier turning on a new command. The army shouted the prince's name. The old men who minded seals remembered which way the wind always blows in storms, towards the man who can keep you alive. Atalus, dangerous, connected, found himself suddenly too conspicuous. He was far away with troops meant for Asia, and letters with large opinions bear ill tidings faster than horses. Cleopatra Eurydice's position went from blessing to threat in an afternoon. Macedon is not kind to women whose usefulness ends. What happens next has been reported with varying degrees of relish and horror. It is enough for now to say that Olympias's retreat had been strategic. Her return would be decisive. In the fog that follows assassinations, attribution is a game played by those safe enough to make lists. The simplest list has one name: Pausanias, scorned and seeking a spectacular end that would make the men who had wronged him look up from their cups at last. Another list adds Atalus in absentia, either as cause, his treatment of Pausanias, or as target, remove Philip to clear paths. A darker list gives Olympias a pen and Alexander a nod, and imagines mother and son conspiring like characters, forced to be as theatrical as their detractors always wanted them. The Persian list is tidy. Remove the invader before he invades. Tidy lists are often lies that take good notes. What makes the murder both shocking and unsurprising is the way it fits Macedonia. A civilization superb at turning private motion, grief, anger, lust into public outcomes, crowns, wars, funerals with policy attached. In a court where men wed nations and drink with their enemies and adopt sons with one hand while arranging their removal with the other, a knife at a festival is not aberration. It is a method hoping to pass for passion. The day's splendor made the blade look like God's own punctuation. The army's shout made it look like grammar. Alexander stepped into the space made by the body on the flagstones. Olympias stepped out of Epirus, and into the script she believed the gods had written and she had edited. Between them lay a kingdom that needed to be convinced it had not just been orphaned. Between them also lay blood, old, new, to come. We will follow how they spent it. For today, hold the image. A king in white splits the air and falls. A boy becomes a problem. Solver with an entire world as the problem. A woman who kept serpents is accused, again, of keeping worse. The palace is battlefield. The feast is over. The campaign has begun. They crowned him while the floor was still telling the story of what had happened on it. Macedon could not afford the luxury of mourning. It did the arithmetic of survival instead. A king had fallen. A kingdom that made kings out of consent with weapons shouted the name it trusted to keep death from widening. Alexander, 20, stood where his father's breath had stopped, and the army made a wall of sound around him that said, "We are not leaderless, we are merely between orders." Boys became men in that shout. Men became corpses by nightfall. A purge is not a tantrum, it is book, keeping done in blood. The list wrote itself as quickly as scribes could cut quills. Atalus, the dangerous uncle by marriage with troops in Asia, and a taste for toasts that wounded dealt with at distance. A letter that travelled faster than remorse. A warrant that turned reputation into liability. Amintus, son of Perdiccas, a scion with an old claim, and a face that made conservative nobles feel grammatical removed. Minor Argiads, inconvenient cousins with the wrong friends retired to the only quiet Macedon offers. It was not only cruelty, it was the same method by which Philip had once welded a quarrelsome barony into a state that frightened cities. Continuity demanded a hard mourning. The palace had its own ledger. Cleopatra Eurydice, last wife and Macedonian darling, no longer a bridge but a rival span over a river that had become flood. Sources male, later, fond of making a woman monstrous to tidy the morality, say Olympias, entered the rooms where Cleopatra hid and compelled an ending. Some say she forced the girl to a rope. Some say she placed the infant on a pyre. Some say both and add details, because appetite likes footnotes. We cannot know exactly. We know the result. Cleopatra and her child threat as fact were removed from the chessboard. It is indecent to call it policy. It is dishonest to call it anything else. Olympias came out of retreat like weather returning. Not to sit the throne, Macedon did not do queens that way, but to alter temperature. She was not regent, she was presence. The court learned quickly to step around her rituals the way they stepped around lords' tempers. What she brought was not just ferocity. She brought legitimacy paid for in older coin than decrees. Libations at the right altars. Dodona's oak given gifts and questions. Night-long theosoi, where women sang the names that make the world feel less arbitrary. Macedon is not a pious land in the Athenian style. Its sanctity is practical, like its horses. Olympias understood that visible favor from the gods made a useful shadow behind a new king. If she struck first, she blessed after, and always with a letter. Her correspondence with her son, the fragments we imagine between Plutarch's cooled sentences, carried both milk and iron. "You are chosen," the ink might say in one line, and then, 3 lines later, "Do not forget how quickly a king becomes alone when he believes his own herald." She sends relics and advice in the same parcel and expects both to be used. She tells him which nobles' wives are a danger because their brothers are clever. She reminds him that Antipater has virtues that look like stubbornness and vices that sound like counsel. She flatters him with gods and corrects him with mother. A difficult correspondence, and the only one he cannot ignore. Set against her theatre of sanctity is another presence from his youth. Aristotle, cool as a winter hill. The philosopher had given Alexander lists and causes, the habit of asking why before he cut. Where Olympias staged omens, Aristotle offered categories. Where she wrote to him about signs, Aristotle had once made him catalogue fish and winds and constitutions. Alexander carried Homer annotated by Aristotle's hand. He also carried his mother's thunderbolt in his head. The two are not enemies so much as counterweights. You can hear the balance in a young king's first acts. ritual to please men who like the world to be watched by gods, reform to please an army that likes pay chests and roads. The Corinthian League needed renewing. Athens and Thebes needed reassurance mixed with reminder. Thessaly needed to be told it had chosen well by breathing. Alexander moved fast and officially. He was elected hegemon, where his father had been hegemon. He promised Persia to the Greeks in tones that sounded both familiar and unnervingly personal. He rode out with companions who had once been boys in Mieza, pupils dressed in curiosity and spears, Hephaestion, Ptolemy, Perdiccas, names that would become coordinate points on a map the world still uses. Those who could not love him learned to be afraid. Those who could do either felt destiny at their elbow and did not look too closely at whose hand it was. Inside that public choreography, Olympias adjusted from strike to influence. A palace does not need only executioners. It needs memory in a woman's handwriting. She gives banquets to the gods that double as reckonings for men. She refurbishes shrines whose priests have gossip to trade. She makes the women's world in Pella the spaces no man enters without feeling clumsy into a net of information. When a court poet praises Alexander, son of Zeus, another poet praises Olympias, friend of Dionysus, and both poems are policy. She does not overreach. She seats herself where ancient and present gossip can touch fingers. The boys at court pages, squires, thin-chinned runners with eyes full of futures watch quickly how careers are made. Some carry letters for the Queen Mother and begin to learn where parchment can be saying nothing and everything at once. Others carry spears for the king and begin to understand that the distance between a title and a burial is one order badly understood. Those who survive the season become men with uses. Those who do not become ghosts, who trained other men to be careful. Macedon devours youth and calls it tradition. Olympias neither invented that appetite nor apologized for knowing how to season it. If all this reads like cruelty with a hymn book, it is also defense. The Macedonian norms of succession, no straight primogeniture, the army's acclamation, the efficient cruelty of eliminating those who might be tempted to test the acclamation meant that hesitation was a crime. Cleopatra Eurydice's elimination was not an aberration but a terrible compliance with the way this crown had always been worn and kept. In another country, a widow and child would have been wards. In Macedon, they were pretexts waiting for a man with a following. Olympias, who had spent a lifetime watching men talk about necessity, chose to be necessity before it spoke in someone else's mouth. Alexander himself understood the ledger. He had the public virtue of being quick to forgive when forgiveness cost nothing, and the private firmness to kill when mercy would breed a civil war in the spring. His first year is a string drawn tight. Thrace bowed, Illyrians reminded. Thebes destroyed when it forgot fear. An act that made Athens gasp and cooperate. A demonstration that the new man would be Philip when it suited and more when it needed doing. Through all this, letters went and came between Pella and wherever the king was that day, lines that both blessed and scolded. Take Persia. We can imagine Olympias writing, but take your own men with you, not Persia into yourself. Honor Aristotle, she might have added, but do not let him write kings with the same pen he writes fish. The charge often thrown at Olympias that she made Alexander divine in his own head misses the play's second act. She made him answerable to gods, which is different. A man answerable upwards can be reminded. A man answerable only to himself becomes an empire with a pulse and no ears. Her oracles were both glue and leash. She tied him to Dodona, to Samothrace, to a web of significance that could be tugged when his temper outran his patience. When she scolded, it was usually to tell him the difference between glory and gossip, between honor that spends wisely and vanity that spends for the sound of coin. So, a storm crowned. The lightning was not just his, it was arranged. The thunder had been rehearsed in women's rooms, in soldiers' tents, in the courtyards of gods. The purge made space. The rituals filled it with permission. The letters kept the new wall from tilting while the mortar set. Men will say this is monstrous. Others will sigh that it was necessary. Both are lazy. Better to say it was Macedonian, a place where policy sleeps with prophecy and wakes with a sword in its hand. Olympias did not invent that bed. She taught her son how to get up from it quickly. Aristotle's shade remains at the edge of the room tables of causes, tidy ethics, the science of not being fooled by omens. Olympias is in the center, incense and instruction. Between them, a young king revises himself daily into the man the army will follow across a sea. He reads one letter and feels immortal. He reads the next and remembers to sleep with his dagger near and his pride far. That balance will wobble. For now, it holds. The storm has a crown. It also has a mother who keeps a barometer. Empires are held by roads and rumors as much as by spears. While Alexander turned Asia into a corridor with his name on it, Macedon at home was a conversation conducted on papyrus Olympias at one end, Antipater at the other, each with a fistful of seals and a talent for turning ink into action. The two never had to meet to hate each other's methods. She made meaning, he made order. Between meaning and order lies a quarrel that can swallow kingdoms. Antipater, left in charge of Greece, was the sort of man who files the world until it fits the drawer. He had kept Philip's machine humming. Now he kept Alexander's taxes moving and the cities polite. He did not need a queen mother writing from Pella as if the gods were on her stationery. Olympias, for her part, knew the power of a letter that arrived wrapped in ritual. She could not sit on the council. She could sit in a man's head by post. She wrote to Alexander blessing, warning, scolding. And she wrote around Antipater, to Thessalian matrons, to Ephebe's mothers, to priests whose oak leaves were louder than edicts. He wrote to the king about levies, mutinies, and the Spartan king Agiai's getting ideas. She wrote about omens, women's talk, and which noble had a house so full of flattery it must be hiding treason. The logistics of that paper war were their own theatre. A letter began on a wax tablet, wooden leaves hinged like a book, black wax scored with a stylus, while a secretary caught the grammar before the god seized the pen. The fair copy went on Egyptian papyrus, the reed script small and quick, the ink a sober mix of soot and gum that dried under a sprinkle of sand. The sheet was folded and corded, then sealed with warm wax beeswax, thickened with resin, and coloured with cinnabar, and impressed with a signet, the imprint as personal as a face. Some used clay bullae when the road was long. Clay dries into suspicion you can't melt and reseal with a kettle. Couriers wore belts with slits to hide dispatches against theft. When speed mattered more than comfort, a rider took the Aegean ferries to Asia, picked up a fresh horse along the royal road Alexander had inherited and improved from Persian Angarian, and rode into Susa with a mouthful of dust and a hand that smelled of wax. Letters were opened with ceremony, a counterseal across the cord, so that any tampering reads like a confession. A servant bringing a brazier's steam to ease the wax if discretion trumped honesty. Olympias kept a little knife for thread and a long memory for handwriting. Antipater kept clerks who catalogued seals, and a say-so with harbour masters, so that ships carrying unhelpful news tarried a day longer than was strictly necessary. Messages met in the middle like armies, one saying pay, the other saying pray, and cities learned to read which would arrive first. From the east came news that unsettled Macedonian stomachs. Alexander in Persian robes for ceremonial days. Persians taking posts in the bureaucracy. Talk of proskynesis court obeisance that Greeks associated with honour due to gods, not men. Olympias, who had staged her son's divine hype with a mother's zeal, understood better than anyone the danger of the wrong kind of god. She had made him answerable upward. She had not made him untouchable. Her letters on this were sharp as winter. Be a god in Egyptian sand if the locals must breathe easier. Be a king when Macedonian men are watching. Do not hire strangers to clap the loudest. Your own people will stop hearing you. Behind the piety was politics. Macedonians tolerate thunderbolts in poems. They expect their pay in drachmas and their kings in boots. Antipater wrote the opposite anxiety from the other flank, that Olympias's letters were spoiling the broth. He put it as administration. The Queen Mother's influence unsettles the cities, but the grammar was older. Men suspicious of women who could gather other women and make something happen. He planted rumors west, that Olympias behaved as if she were regent, that she bullied Eurydice's kin beyond necessity, that sacrifices in Pella were now theatre with daggers in the wings. He sent these not only to counsellors but to poets and rhapsodes. A slur packed in a hexameter travels farther than an edict. Olympias countered with counter-whispers. Antipater grew slow, jealous, thrifty with soldiers' coin. He invited Spartan mischief by hoarding readiness and spending excuses. In taverns from Larissa to Megara, men repeated a line they couldn't source. Antipater likes his Greece small. Another line, with equal fatherlessness. Olympias likes her son huge. Neither was strictly fair. Both were effective. To Alexander, marshalling India in his head, the quarrel arrived as alternate weather. One week, a packet from Antipater tidy, the seal unromantic, full of numbers and roads and men called by both their names, because administration hates confusion. The next, a packet from Olympias, the seal smelling faintly of myrrh, the script alternately a blessing and a pin, the contents a mixture of priest's gossip and mother's arithmetic. If you do this, subtract that man. If you honor that foreign rite, add 2 discontents at home. He tried to turn both into policy. He sent sternness east letters to cities, reminding them the League of Corinth had not dissolved because a king had changed his shirt, and sent soft west letters to his mother, in which he thanked, evaded, promised, hedged. Sometimes he did the blunt royal thing, order Antipater and Olympias to make peace. That command convinced no one. The divine pretensions worsened the paper weather. After Siwa, where priests called him son of Ammon, Alexander's own letters took on a tone that courtiers mistook for altitude. He experimented with proskynesis at court. Callisthenes, Aristotle's kinsman, and a sour wine of a man, made a point of refusing. The quarrel about bowing was the quarrel about what kind of king he would be, dressed up as etiquette. Olympias wrote with both hands. 1. To warn that making Greeks bow would turn admiration into the kind of obedience that squeaks. The other, to insist that if he would be God, he should be pious about it, build temples, not just wardrobes. Antipater wrote the practical version. Bowing wastes time. It breeds resentment. It slows payday. In a tent somewhere beyond Gaugamela, Alexander read both and did what all kings do. He kept the parts that matched his mood. If Olympias's pen was sharper than Antipater's spear, it was because pen and spear had different targets. The spear holds men together by fear and habit. The pen convinces them they always wanted to stand that way. She wrote to women. A constituency generals forget until the day a city's gates open inward, because someone's mother decided enough. She wrote to priests, who can make obedience sound like piety, and piety sound like good harvests. She wrote to young officers' sisters, who tell brothers what kind of man the king seems today. Antipater wrote to magistrates and harbour masters. His letters moved grain efficiently and slanders slowly. Efficiency wins years. Imagination wins afternoons. The afternoons add up. There were moments of truce. News of AGIs of Sparta trying to light a second Thermopylae forced both pens to point at the same map. Antipater marched and won. Olympias thanked a god for victory and wrote ahead to ensure the thanksgiving in Athens was both earnest and loud. She never lost a chance to tie Alexander's outcomes to Zeus's patience. He never lost a chance to tie Olympias's meddling to mother's love when writing back, "You are my best counselor," he would write. And then to Antipater, "You are my necessary man." Both letters were true. Both were insufficient. When frictions turned to fractures, the paper war took on knives. Antipater began grooming Cassander, who would one day make a career of resenting Alexander's theatre. Olympias began strengthening ties in Epirus, where Aeacid pride could be shaped into a lever. The seals multiplied. The air in Pella felt sticky with wax and intention. In Asia, Alexander chased horizons none of them would live to reach. In Macedon, the conversation continued to load the future with kindling. Letters cross distance faster than armies can close it. They do their work in hearts. When at last men began to choose sides with swords, the choices had been rehearsed in ink for years. It is fashionable to call such exchange mere paper. It misunderstands how states breathe. A general can hold a city for a season. A rumor can own it for a generation. Olympias's letters knew which fear to stroke and which hope to tell the truth quickly enough to keep it useful. Antipater's dispatches knew which road to mend and which harbour to keep shut until a client's ship had a head start. Between them, Macedon did not sleep, it only blinked. And every time it opened its eyes, another seal had broken, another cord fallen, another order become story, or story become law. Alexander, somewhere between river and mountain, packed both sets of letters away with the Homer Aristotle had annotated and the amulets his mother had blessed. He would need all three. The empire he was building required roads. The one waiting for him at home required letters. In the end, the pen and the spear were aimed at the same truth. Who decides, and how far away may they stand when they decide? Olympias and Antipater answered differently and with conviction. The empire survived both answers until it didn't. Babylon, the 3rd of June 23, BCE. The world's pulse miscounted and then stopped. Alexander, 32, and burning at both ends, lay in a palace that had learned to expect him to live. Fever. 9, 10, 11 days, depending on whose wishful memory you prefer. He drank, he planned, he whispered orders with a voice that thought itself immortal. Then nothing. No last instructions that anyone could agree on. No neat seal for the great chest of the empire. Just a bed. A room that smelled of balsam and sweat. And the most dangerous sentence in politics. To the strongest. Or perhaps he said, to the best. Or perhaps he said nothing at all, and men fitted words to grief like armor to a corpse. What followed was not mourning so much as division. The companions grasped at regency as if order could be obtained by shouting. There was Philip III Eurydice, Alexander's half-brother royal blood, a mind damaged by either fate or malice. There was Roxana, the Bactrian wife, pregnant and dangerous if you were another wife. There were the satrapies like ripe orchards, and hands everywhere. Perdiccas took the title of regent, more earthquake than glue. The army knocked the empire into a shape that could move for now. Macedon itself was left to Antipater, as before old, durable, allergic to theatre. The corpse, if you believe Ptolemy's better instincts or worse loyalties, went to Egypt. The legend would live better in Alexandria than in Aegae. Olympias wasn't in Babylon. She was in Macedon with letters and altars, the mother whose pen could calm a city and set a general's teeth on edge. Her son's death reached her in versions that all felt insufficient. The first version stabbed, the later ones littered. She swallowed the pain the way court women are forced to swallow everything, quietly, in order to live long enough to mix grief with policy. She had spent 20 years building a story about a destined child. The boy, Alexander IV, would be the continuation, not the conclusion. Roxana did what royal widows do when the room goes cold. She turned fear into action. Statira and Drypotes, Persian ladies of Alexander's later politics, vanished. Most accounts say murdered at Roxana's order. It is a brutal line in the ledger. It is also Macedonian arithmetic. Remove pretexts before they grow into banners. In late 323, Alexander IV was born. The cradle became an office. The office became a battlefield. The infant was king on paper beside Philip III. Two bodies for a crown that preferred one head at a time. Men swore oaths with spears upraised to both. Oaths are elastic, spears are not. Perdiccas tried to hold a thing that could not be held, commanding Asia like a conductor who has never seen the sea. He failed spectacularly in Egypt and died for it. 321. At Triparadisos, the satrapies were reshuffled as if the gods were gamblers and had lost interest in fairness. Antipater, old, steady, patient as a wall, emerged as regent of the empire. He took the king's adult child, an actual child, back into his keeping. The empire he kept was already being spent by men with private appetites and public justifications. Olympias watched this from a distance that was not detachment. She understood timing. She had been made monstrous for acts that were policies because men prefer their necessity delivered by men. Nevertheless, she had influence and kin. She stayed out of the room that was about to fill with knives and instead set altars in places where choice was made to look holy. Letters moved like pieces. Priests were reminded to speak at moments when the army was listening. She did not rush. She waited for the inevitable change. Old men die. In 319 BCE, Antipater did. He died cleverly and foolishly both. Cleverly, because he knew Cassander, his son, was many-thingsable, ambitious, fast with resentment, but not a man others would follow willingly, while the old man's shadow was warm. Foolishly, because he named Polyperchon as regent instead, an older general with a good reputation and inadequate grip on the parts of Greece that paid late and argued early. Cassander felt passed over with the kind of righteousness that writes history in other people's blood. He allied himself with men who hated Olympias on principle, and Polyperchon on calculation, Antigonus in Asia, Ptolemy in Egypt, and shaped a headline, Order against chaos, with himself as order, and everyone else as the crisis. That was the moment Olympias chose alliance, not retreat. She could have fled to Dodona and grown old, telling a shrine what it wanted to hear. She could have played grandmother only and left the arithmetic to men who preferred it violent. Instead, she looked at the board and saw that Polyperchon had legitimacy and not enough weight, that Roxana had a claim and not enough friends, and that Cassander intended to reduce Macedon to an estate handed to himself and his brothers by the logic of the sword. She moved. Timeline for your sanity. As if she were whispering to us over a map. 323 BC. Alexander dies at Babylon. Roxana pregnant. Aridaeus crowned. 320. Perdiccas dead. Triparadisos. Antipater made regent. 319. Antipater dies. Polyperchon named regent. Cassander rebels. That is the scaffold. Now watch who climbs it. Olympias wrote to Polyperchon not with flattery, but with utility. She offered Alexander IV living claim, soft head, hard consequence. She offered Epirus the Aeacid connection, which can be a wall or a door depending who is knocking. She offered the women's rooms of Macedon, places where tokens and gifts make politics taste like hospitality. She did not offer an army. She offered permission. The Queen Mother endorses regency against usurpation. In Macedon, the difference between rebel and restorer is often one respectable woman's mouth. Polyperchon accepted because it gave him a narrative to wear over his lack of troops. He issued proclamations in the names of the two kings. He denounced Cassander as a man who liked shortcuts and long titles. He invited cities to choose between old legitimacy and new efficiency. Many cities chose delay, which is a political position in Greece. Athens hesitated over democracy, like a widow who remembers both the man's virtues and his snores. The Peloponnese watched to see whose coin arrived without too much sermon attached. Cassander, brisk, built forts, bought friends, and wrote letters that sounded like receipts. He took Thessalonica and began to make Macedon feel like a ledger that would one day feature his name at the top. He needed the queens under his thumb to secure the column titled Right to Rule. Olympias and Roxana had to be turned from assets into hostages. Olympias saw that coming before Cassander wrote the memo to himself. She did two things at once: moved closer to Macedon and broadened the quarrel. She brought Roxana and Alexander IV under a wing that had learned to shelter reputation as well as flesh. She reminded Epirus that Macedon's future king was a grandson. She wrote to Epirote nobles with the old acid contempt for men who ran their houses like counting rooms. She pulled ritual into the streets again, sacrifices for Philip, for Alexander, for Zeus the protector, so that when she acted, it would look like service to line and God, rather than the ambition her enemies could readily sell. The map of the successors lay before her like a chessboard odd rules. Too many queens, bishops who thought they were kings, pawns with names. Antigonus, vast and one, eyed in Asia. Ptolemy, neat and acquisitive in Egypt. Lysimachus, careful on the Thracian lip. Seleucus, patient and displaced. Eumenes, talented and doomed by the wrong kind of loyalty. She did not intend to play it. She intended to flip it when the timing gave her permission to look like restore, not ruin. That meant waiting for one more tilt a mistake in Cassander's overconfidence, a misstep in Polyperchon's piety, a shift in Asia that reached Macedon by the long road of rumor, but with the weight of fact. All the while, she kept one hand on letters and one on altars. The paper war with Antipater had ended because death had the better seal. The quarrel with Cassander would be steel, sooner or later. She made sure that when the blade was drawn, Macedon would watch it gleam and think, "Ah yes, this is what duty looks like when a mother does it," not because she needed applause, because applause in Macedon is often the difference between a city opening a gate and a city inventing courage at the last minute. Alexander was gone. His shadow remained long enough to frighten small men into big acts and big men into legend. In that shadow, Olympias chose to stand forward, not aside. If the empire could not be kept whole, she would keep the line. If kingship had become a chair with too many claimants and too few legs, she would be the stone under one leg that kept it from tipping. That is not romance, it is work. And she had always been good at work that men preferred to call something else. The board is set. Cassander reaches for the piece he thinks is the queen. Polyperchon reaches for the rule book. Roxana holds a child who is name before he is person. Olympias takes a breath that smells of oak and wax and blood remembered and moves towards Macedon with a look that says she has already decided how this particular storm will be spent. She did not return like a petitioner. She came back like a verdict. Year 317 BCE, Polyperchon's seal on a letter naming her ally and guarantor, Epirus behind her, Roxana at her side with the small, perilous king, a column of men who had learned obedience in the old way by following someone who looked like history. Macedon felt the weather change. The army standing against her was not a foreign enemy. It was Macedonian, two men in whose ears Philip's voice still lived, men flattered recently by Cleopatra Eurydice, the young queen who had discovered that steel has a grammar. She had tried to command in her husband's name Philip III, Arrhidaeus, the gentle, damaged half-brother in whose mouth other men placed decisions. Eurydice had written orders with a firmness that made older captains blink. She might have made a kingdom of paper behave for a season if the paper hadn't suddenly acquired Olympias's handwriting. The two parties met not far from Amphipolis, in that grey hour when armies decide whether they are troops or just people. Olympias did not ride a charger with a spear levelled. She showed them a child, Alexander IV, small and claim-shaped, and she named their dead. Philip, father of victories, Alexander, giver of wages and stories. She played the harp strings that still ran through their chests. Macedonians, hardened by campaigns, are not sentimental, exactly, but they are loyal to line when line is embodied. The veterans looked at the boy, at the mother of the man whose shadow made all their pay notes possible, and their spears learned the direction of down. Shields tilted. A murmur moved like water through wheat. Eurydice's officers discovered they had hands, not ranks. They surrendered them. Army became audience. From that instant, Olympias moved in present tense. She put Philip III under guard gently, say the kinder sources, decisively, say the rest. She wrote the letter that instructs a court to stand on one side of a room and then on the other, and the room obeyed. She entered Pella not with a swagger, but with procession. If you are searching for theatre, you will find it. Sacrifice at the old altars, libations poured at the royal tombs at Aegi, the oak of Dodona invoked by name. She did not invent religion as policy. She used it with the competence of a woman who understands what permission looks like in a pious land. The incense hung in chambers where the smell of decisions would soon be different. Contemporaries and later tellers argue over staging. Some write that she appeared in a mourning mantle, hair unbound, at Philip's Heroon, and wreathed the stele with myrtle, as if to remind the dead that the living husbandry of their name was safe in her hands. Others imply she wore white, the colour of holy things, and held the boy when she spoke, so that lineage stood in the crook of her arm. No source denies the effect. The palace felt both sanctified and sorted. Priests found themselves busy. Messengers found themselves running. Then came the reckoning. It has been called vengeance. It was also policy. Cassander's adherents were seized. Nicanor, brother to Cassander and keeper of a garrison that had grown too independent in the years since Alexander left executed. Other officers whose names the clerks knew too well, cut away like rot from wood that must bear weight again. Numbers are unreliable in our sources. The gesture is not. Olympias cleared the corridors until her own breath did not echo off unfriendly walls. Philip III, Eurydice, had worn a crown in a way that made the crown compassionate and the kingdom vulnerable. In Macedon, sentiment is respectable until it endangers order. With her power consolidated by soldiers' acclamation, Olympias directed the end of a reign that had always been other people's handwriting. He was put to death quietly, without public theatre, so that there would be no rallying point later for men who love causes, because causes excuse them from arithmetic. Macedon seldom permits two kings when one will do. It calls it piety when necessary. It calls it justice when useful. Adaea Eurydice faced something more ornate. She had tried to rule with a pen held in a fist. Macedon admires that in men, and rarely pardons it in women who do not have the right companions in their myth. Olympias arranged, according to several sources, a scene that reads like tragedy, curated by someone who knew her Euripides. A sword, a noose, and a cup. The choices traditionally presented to the proud at the last instant, when dignity can still be staged. Some say hemlock, some simply say poison. All agree she was made to choose. Eurydice, trained by a mother, Cynane, who taught her war on horseback before someone taught her politeness, chose the rope. The queen who had written commands at 20 died by her own hand rather than by a man's. A grim courtesy, and it reads like Olympias, knowing exactly how stories are made. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was example. The palace is a battlefield, with rooms instead of fields. Olympias made it sacred, while she made it safe for her version of safety. She renamed offices, replaced stewards with men who owed her first and Pella second, sent thank offerings to shrines that know how to take a city's temperature. If there were choruses at night, the women's processions, skins and thyrsi, drums that remember how the body keeps time, they were partly for the gods and partly for men, to remind them that power here had a frame older than any one general schedule. The rituals were never window dressing. Liberally poured wine asserts a peace. Garlands assert a right to enjoy it. A bull on the stone says a god is in attendance and listening. She ordered messengers to Dodona and Samothrace, the places where Alexander's story had once found its permissions. She sent votive gifts, not only for favor, but as statements. The line of Aeacus remembers who keeps the hinge between mortal and divine oiled. In a world where men of the sword were increasingly convinced that oaths are old furniture, she upped the stagecraft until even swords remembered to behave in public. For a brief span, Macedon obeyed a clarity that frightened it. Orders went out under the names of the kings, the child, and the absent adult, and came back obeyed. Coin moved, grain moved. Hard letters went west to cities that had forgotten which end of a decree is the blade. Soft letters went east to remind allies that the Queen Mother remained the sort of woman whose curses stick. The successor map trembled, because a settled Macedon damages everyone's improvisations, and Cassander, counting the bodies and the days, began to march. If you need the ritual staging in closer focus, look at the tombs at Aegae. Imagine the lamps carried down into the cool chambers where the Argiads sleep under painted roofs. The libation poured wine, perhaps mixed with honeydark on the threshold. The garland laid myrtle, if you want to be exact, because myrtle remembers victory and marriage, both relevant to a woman returning to both. The proclamation spoken in a voice meant to be overheard by gods. Alexander's house is not abandoned. The child stands in the doorway. The enemies wear their own names now. None of this is invention. It is the grammar of Macedon. Olympias simply spoke it fluently at the tempo of crisis. And yet, even in triumph, the edge shows. Macedon endures control the way a strong horse endures a good rider, glad for the competence, thirsty to bolt. Executions by order. They also print IOUs in other men's hearts. The families of those removed went home and sharpened their silence into plans. Cassander read the room from without, recognized an opportunity written in blood, and brought the argument back to steel. For an incandescent season, Olympias ruled without the word, as presence and principle. She did not sit the throne, she sat the center. She was sacrificer and judge, mother and memory, snake and oak. A kingdom that often prefers men who looked like spears had accepted a woman who looked like the hand that aims a spear and the song that tells it where to land. It could not last. The work had been done. Lineage defended. A child enthroned on parchment. The dangerous middle held long enough for allies to pretend themselves brave. The answer to what comes next was already on the road, closing gates as it came. For now, remember the sequence. An army that refused to fight its own mythology. A queen who could write endings that read like rituals. A palace cleaned and reconsecrated. 2 crowns reduced mercilessly to 1. The Serpent Queen was not a superstition. She was a method. And in Macedon, methods rule until somebody stronger insists on a new one. Cassander was almost at the door. Winter on the Thermaic Gulf comes with a particular bluntness. Salt in the wind, iron in the light, a taste of old brine on the tongue even when you are far from the key. Pydna felt that winter like a verdict. Cassander ringed the town with men who had learnt the economy of sieges, no heroics, no banners if you don't need them, just ditches, palisades, engines when timber is cheap, and time when time is cheaper. Inside the walls, Olympias held court in a shrinking circle of warmth. Roxana and Alexander IV guarded like relics, a garrison more loyal by memory than by pay, and citizens who had thought loyalty might cost less than it did. Hunger tutored them all. Sieges, for the attackers, are maths and mud. For the besieged, they are philosophy. What does a city mean when its granaries are arithmetic? In the first week, there were rations. In the second, excuses. By the third, inventions, the broth that remembered beasts, the bread that remembered flour. Letters went out as long as riders could. Omens were asked as long as priests could afford sleep. Polyperchon promised movement. Epirus looked west and then inward. Aeacides would try and be unseated by his own, because kingdoms under pressure often remove the king before they remove the pressure. The hope of relief became a polite lie, the walls told themselves. Olympias did not preside, as if defeat could be postponed by posture. She worked. The shrines were busy. Quiet libations poured not as theatre but as discipline. Little obediences that keep men from falling out of their own heads. She walked the ramparts, not in armor, not pretending manhood, but as what she was, mother of the line, author of the present. Men saluted because their hands remembered. A boy king stood at a parapet once, and a veteran cried without making sound, because the whole war of the last 20 years ran through his throat at once and had nowhere better to be. That was the function of her presence, to keep shape in people when food could not. Cassander did not play melodrama. He tightened the ring. Wells were watched, runners were taken, terms were floated like baited hooks. Safety if you come out early, mercy if you do it elegantly, consideration for the child if the mother stops being useful. No one who understood Cassander believed a line of this. But starving cities are moralists until the 4th week. Then they become pragmatists. Inside Pydna, the murmur grew the sound of men deciding whether surrender is a betrayal or a punctuation mark. She held them with names. She spoke Philip and Alexander into the air the way a man speaks facts into the minutes of a meeting. She made the city remember that Macedon is a line, not a season, and that to misplace the line in a hungry winter is to misplace the summer to come. Yet her own arithmetic was not sentimental. She counted children thin in the face before she counted glory. When the last grain jars made the particular hollowness that says policy has become cruelty, she sent envoys. The terms everyone knew were paper masks. But ritual matters even to men who intend to lie. Cassander wrote a promise in his careful hand. It said safety enough times that the wax shone with the weight of the word. The seals were impressive. Seals are the costume of trust. The gate opened. There are few sounds more defeated than a city's bar being lifted from its sockets by men who have not eaten. Cassander entered not as sack but as audit. He took Roxana and the child into custody with all the tenderness of a man boxing a weapon he intends to store for later use. He arrayed prisoners' officers who had written the wrong kind of loyalty, citizens who had lent their good names to her bad politics, messengers caught on the wrong leg of a relay. He came at last to Olympias. Here Macedon's particular grammar of fear and sanctity wrote itself out in a way no strategist can compel. His Macedonian soldiers would not strike her. They had cheered Philip. They had taken spoils from Gaugamela. They had joked about the thunderbolt and called it wine talk. They had muttered about women and rites and Bacchae in the palace. They had, in private, detested her. But detestation is not the same as license. The mother of Alexander carried a kind of protection that did not need laws. She was dangerous, but she was holy not in the priestly sense, but in the way a tomb is holy. You do not put your hand to it first. You let someone else enact the necessary blasphemy and then agree, tidy, afterward. That is the gendered edge of Macedon, a country that distrusts women with power and yet builds its lineage, its very myth, on the flesh and speech of its queens. Men sneer at rites in the women's rooms. Men make and keep crowns by those rites. They call a woman's authority witchcraft when they want to reduce it. They call it ancestry when they want to use it. Olympias had been both accusation and instrument for a generation. The soldiers, standing with spears at rest in Pydna, felt both truths at once, and found they could not be the first to unmake the woman who had made their king. Sanctity here is not kindness. It is the paralysis of awe. So Cassander did what Cassander always did when Macedonian scruples were inconvenient. He outsourced them. In one telling, he summoned foreigners, men with no pilgrimage to the tombs at Aegae in their bones, no memory of Philip's voice, no boyhood story of Alexander cutting knots. In another, he gathered the kinsmen of those Olympias had executed the category, not us, broadened to include grief. In both versions, the point is the same. Men who were not bound by that particular superstition of the line were brought to do the work Macedonians would not. They came into the chamber, saw a woman who would not kneel, and did what men do when asked to turn politics into corpse. Diodorus will tell you she wore royal clothing and addressed her executioners with calm. Plutarch will season the account with grace and poison both. Later readers will insert stones into hands and silence into mouths to heighten severity. We do not need embroidery. What matters is that courage looked like stillness, and that death looked like policy finally finishing a sentence begun at Aige. She died because she had authored too much, because Cassander required proof, because Macedon cannot abide two centers in a single room. Whether by sword or stone or order made flesh, the end was close and cold. Cassander denied her the rites she had spent a life weaponizing. No immediate burial in the royal ground, no libations poured by public hand, no official grief. This is what men do to women they fear even when they have won. They attempt to erase the grammar by which she wrote herself into the world. He installed guards over the living claims Roxana and Alexander IV with a patience that looks like mercy until you read ahead to Amphipolis years later and find the line drawn to its miserable finish. He wrote letters that described the event in words that sounded like sanitation. He paid the city with order. He taxed it with shame. Then he set about being king. In fact, if not yet in name. Fortresses, friends, a marriage to Thessalonice, Philip's daughter, to turn scandal into pedigree. Within Pydna, after, there would have been a day that felt airless. People learned to talk around the absence the way villagers talk around a frost that has bitten, hard, all the way to the root. Men who had refused to strike her first consoled themselves that they had not struck at all. They were not wrong, they were not right. Foreign hands had done the sacrilege. Macedonian history would make it local again by telling and retelling until it belonged to everyone and no one. And there the line from life to legend hardens. Olympias the woman had been parameter and provocation, mother and knife, right and rule. Olympias, the legend, becomes simpler, as legends always do when cold takes them. She is the serpent queen, punished, the proud Bacchante, silenced, the architect of destiny, collapsed under its costs. Men who disliked her call her monstrous, so they can enjoy the story without paying tax to her intelligence. Men who admired her call her terrible so they can admire without imitating. Either way, the price of the legend is the ice over the particulars, the letters, the decisions, the sleepless years during which she kept a fragile line from breaking in the wind. Sanctity and fear, at the last, wrote the same sentence in two hands. Macedonians who would not raise the first blade helped shape a memory in which the blade was always someone else's responsibility. Women's power, which they feared when it moved, became sacred when it stopped. Cassander's version of the future marched outward from Pydna, with the neatness of a ledger reconciled. The boy king and his mother would live for a while longer, in the custody that is only one room gentler than doom. The tombs at Aige would whisper in their own stone grammar about cycles and lines, and the skill with which a nation convinces itself that necessary is the same as right. In winter, the sea is louder on that coast. People who live there say you can hear it inside the town like a drum under conversation. After Pydna, Macedon learned to talk over that sound again, because people do, because markets must open, and wedding feasts must be held, and princes must be taught which hand the sword prefers. But beneath the talk, the drum went on. The woman who had played omen against office and office against omen had been removed. The method remained. And in that, more than the manner of her end, lies the particular chill of her story. The instrument outlives the hand. South, then, across a polite sea to an island that makes even the wind behave. Crete, where hills fold like knees and the light is old coin. We come inland to a low rise above a riverbed and stand before a palace that is really a city that is really a machine for living. Knossos is the name we're taught. But the first lesson is that this isn't a castle. There are no frowning curtain walls, no keep glaring over a moat. What you have instead is movement, 1,000 turns, 1,000 small changes of level, air that goes somewhere, and the feeling that the building wants you to walk it the way water wants a gradient. Begin where the ancients began, the long southward approach. The road tightens, the ground rises, and the first thing you meet is not a door, but breathing space. A broad court under the open sky. Think of it as a heart with 4 chambers. The palace organizes itself around this central court. West, east, north, south. Each wing doing different work, all of them beating to the rhythm of ceremonies no one wrote down but everyone knew how to perform. To the west, thickness and storage terrace, after terrace of long rooms packed once with great pithoi, belly jars that could hide a man. To the east, light and living staircases that climb towards sun, rooms that open like gills to inner courts, thresholds that give way to more thresholds. North is arrival, ramps, and a theatre area, where steps make an audience out of a crowd. South is procession, you can feel bodies passing, drums pacing, colours turning corners. Walk it with your feet, but also with a picture in your head. Stand in the central court and plant yourself like a compass. Face north. You see the north entrance where traffic from the harbour would have spilled in, the paving leaning like a gentle shoulder to coax carts. Turn right east and the building seems to thin. Light wells, stairs, apartments that step up and up again, as if the house were climbing a hill it built inside itself. Turn south. The processional way leads down towards a gate that isn't really a gate, but more a change of temperature. A seam where city becomes palace without having to say stop. Turn west. The walls thicken. Long, narrow magazines sit shoulder to shoulder like soldiers at rest, and you can almost hear the quiet complaint of olive oil and grain waiting their season. Everything here breathes because everything here opens. Light wells puncture the mass like lungs. Picture a shaft dropping through multiple floors, open to the sky, squared by superstructure, its inner walls painted once with reds and blues that made shadow look like a color choice. Air shafts rise in concert with stairs. The stack effect, the hot air slipping up and out, cooler air drawn in along the ground, turns decoration into climate control. Corridors compress and then release you. 6 paces of narrowness, a turn, and suddenly you're in a room the sun understands. It's not a trap. It's a choreography. The building teaches your body where to look by making you sigh when you arrive. The staircases themselves are an argument with darkness. They rise not as spiral screws but as generous flights that wrap inner courts, each landing sharing a margin with a pier and door partition. Those clever wooden frames that can be opened in sections, so a room expands like a bellows or closes down to keep heat where you need it. Post and lintel, yes, but with a mind for mood. Early visitors called these the kings and queens apartments. The labels will do for directions even if they won't stand trial. In one, a lustral basin sits sunk like a secret, whether ritual bath or theatric hollow. It is a place that gathers water as carefully as it gathers sightlines. In another, a bathtub shaped like a friendly amphora waits under a painted frieze while terracotta pipes disguise themselves as rock. Rome gets the press for plumbing. Knossos works with gravity and glazed clay 15 centuries earlier, content to be elegant instead of proud. Follow the water, and you'll see how serious this place is about comfort. Out in the world, water is a river that sulks or floods as it pleases. In here, water obeys. It runs in terracotta conduits under floors and behind walls. It feeds basins and drains latrines. It leaves by channels paved and plastered smooth. There are sediment traps where a modern engineer would expect them. There is slope, measurable, and kindly. Waste goes away fast enough that you do not smell 1,000 people's digestion made civic. Fresh water comes in modestly, without parade. If you were an important body in this house, you did not have to negotiate dirt to be clean. You won't find a single grand door that says, "This is the entrance." You will find thresholds everywhere, some ceremonial, some domestic, many both at once. The building likes routes that double back or skim an inner court, pass a column, hesitate by a relief. The famous horns of consecration, curving shapes like stylized bull horns, surge up on parapets and plinths, repeating until they stop looking like symbols and start feeling like punctuation, the way a cadence tells you when a sentence is about to end. The labrys, the double axe, appears so often it becomes a texture, carved, painted, suggested. You don't read these as text unless a guide insists. You absorb them the way you absorb a language when you live in it. And that word, labyrinth, people learn it early and then spend years unlearning the wrong picture. There is no underground stone maze with a monster at the center and bones for breadcrumbs. There is a feeling the place gives you, that things are deliberately indirect, that you arrive by circling, that you are always near your goal, and also always moving. It is not a puzzle so much as a ritual route compression, turn, release, dark, light, low ceiling, open court. It keeps you aware, which is another word for awake. The myth took the feeling and made it a story. The house took the story and made it a floor plan. If you want a tighter map for your feet, here is a quick walk. Step off the south processional way into the central court. The ground is level. The sky is an unashamed collaborator. Cross to the west. On your left, a line of doorways mouths open into magazines. They are long like ships in dry dock and smell, in your mind, of olive, wine, and bees that only visit in summer. One room shows stone benches and pithoi set into the floor like sunken pots. Storage you can count, inventory you can touch. Turn back to the court and drift north. A paved ramp tilts you gently down towards the northern entrance. On your right, a stepped area gathers people as effortlessly as a theatre pretends it planned to. Now swing east and climb. The famous grand staircase is not pomp, it is invitation. You rise along an inner light well, glancing across to another gallery, where other bodies are also ascending, also pausing. At each landing, pier and door partitions stand ready to make privacy or join it. Off to one side, a room with a seat built into the wall, and griffins watching the so-called throne room, perhaps sacred, perhaps bureaucratic, certainly staged so that an arrival is also a reveal. Higher still, and the rooms soften. Plastered walls, pools of light. A megaron with a floor that remembers the weight of a loom or the quiet of a winter morning. On a wall, a fresco once ran a dolphin caught mid-glide, blue on blue. Delight that forgot to ask permission. Everywhere, air. The house teaches you to seek it. Doors do not simply open. They lead you into places where air is already waiting, temperate, managed. If you've ever been in a building that fights its climate and loses, Knossos feels like a counter-argument, a conversation with sun and wind in which both parties keep their dignity. In summer, heat goes up. In winter, small rooms close their wooden grids and keep warmth the way a hand keeps a secret. If you listen for it, you can hear the stack effect working like a bellows in a forge, a low hum of air passing. There is danger in calling all this modern. It is ancient and intelligent on its own terms, not a primitive prototype of somebody else's cleverness. Roman baths are grander. Greek stoves are more rhetorical. But Knossos is kind to bodies, to light, to the idea that a house should serve you without crowing about it. That kindness reads today as luxury. In the Bronze Age it read as competence. Grain kept dry, rooms kept sweet, smoke given a road. It is easy to fall into romance here, to imagine the bull leapers mid-flight in a courtyard, bright enough to make your eyes ache, to insist that every corridor means a priest's footfall. Better to hold two thoughts at once. This was administration storerooms, tablets, measured oil, and it was stage altars, horns, a route that made crowds into chorus. The labyrinth is the feeling of being carried by both at once, led gently and deliberately into awe. When you leave, it is hard to say where the palace stops. The city around it advances and recedes like a tide. Roads that were once arteries still run the contour of the hill. Fields still lean towards the river. Knossos is not a ruin that ends. It is a building that taught a valley how to breathe, and the lesson lingers. Next, the myth will come for it with a story about a beast. For now, remember how the house moves you. Court, turn, stair, light, room, turn, air, water. A place that feels alive and asks you to be the same. Bulls first, because they won't be ignored. At Knossos and elsewhere on Crete, the animal is not decoration but verb charging through fresco, cresting as plastered horns on parapets, reappearing as rider shaped like living heads you could fill and pour. In the palace's east wing, a painted scene still holds its breath. A bull mid-surge, forelegs extended, a human form caught at the elastic instant between fear and flight. Bull leaping, the guide says, and the word does the minimum. The image refuses to stay still. Was it acrobatics? Ritual? Theatre whose danger was part of the prayer? You can read it three ways in one look. A fearless youth vaulting over state power, a community rehearsing its closeness to danger, a ritual that asks the gods to witness the audacity of human bodies, staying with a force and not being broken by it. The paint itself feels kinetic curves, not corners. Movement gathered and released. A choreography at once real and emblem. Turn your head, and the horns of consecration repeat their lesson. Stylized crescents rising on walls and altars, insisting that sacred space is something you can see before you feel it. They are punctuation as much as symbol, the building's way of telling you when to slow your breath or hand over a thought to someone larger. Down in storerooms and up in quiet chambers, small faience snake goddesses lift their arms, serpents coiling like arguments you cannot refute, bare-breasted, steady-eyed, neither coy nor threatening. They look like household keepers and underworld intermediaries, at once women who carry the earth's wit into rooms where men pretend the sky has all the answers. Snakes glisten, because ideas do when they shed old skins. In a world where grain is blessing and rot is warning, the creature that vanishes into cracks and returns whole becomes a sermon you don't have to write. Then the labries, the double axe that Minoan hands carved into stone and painted onto walls until the sign ceased to be only sign and became texture. It is not a weapon in this context, not a battlefield tool swung to finish an argument, but a mark of presence, a token of what is consecrated, perhaps the emblem of a goddess you don't need to name because you are already in her house. The word labyrinth may owe itself to this object labris plus inthos, the house or place of the double axe, so that what later Greeks imagined as a trap is named, at root, as a sanctuary. If you accept that etymology, the myth shifts under your feet. The labyrinth stops being a punitive maze and becomes a temple precinct that asks for right behavior and offers right belonging in return. All of this, bulls, horns, snakes, axes, lives inside a culture that moved as confidently across water as its painters did across plaster. The Minoans were a sea people who made the Mediterranean a conversation. Their ships stitched Crete to Egypt, papyrus, faience, measured time. To the Levant, cedar, copper, ideas that remember cities. To Anatolia, metals and motives. To the Cyclades, marble, obsidian earlier, the open horizons of island life. Perhaps even farther west, where tin becomes bronze's second breath. They send out Kamares ware, light cups with dark spirals. They import artisanship as easily as they export style. No empire in the Roman sense, no legionary boots on foreign quays, but something harder to resent and, for a while, easier to sustain. Hegemony by attraction and by fleet. Call it a thalassocracy if you like. Better to call it a habit of making other places want what you have and accept your tally sticks as their measures. And yet, their voice is missing. Linear A, the script they used for administration and perhaps for prayer, remains undeciphered. We have the labels tables of numbers disguised as scratches, inventories that once told a steward what to count and a priest what to owe, and we can't read them. It gives the civilization an odd hush. You walk through rooms that speak air and light, you read fresco that reads you back, and the one place where you might hear the exact thought of a Minoan official or singer stays closed. The later linear B tablets of Mycenaean Greeks speak in accounting and gods' names. These earlier leaves of clay ancestors, cousins refuse to open their mouths. The silence is not emptiness, it is reserve. We see their world without the running commentary. It makes you wary of telling their story too loudly in your own accent. So the myth wanders in and offers to perform translation. Minos, king who owns the sea, and demands yearly tribute from a lesser Athens, boys and girls sent to Crete to be consumed by a beast in a labyrinth. Ariadne, a princess with the sort of brains that refuse to be quiet, gives Theseus a thread so he can kill the problem and escape. Later, Greece loved the story because it flatters Athenian cunning and punishes foreign arrogance with domestic heroism. Perhaps it also remembers a period when Crete's ships and style dominated the Aegeans' choices tribute, paid not in children but in grain and goods and deference, the kind of soft pressure that feels like fate until someone brave or hungry names it oppression. That's one metaphor the labyrinth offers. Political domination. You enter a system that is more complex than it lets you admit. There are routes you are allowed to walk, rooms where you may be seen, rooms where you will only be counted. You are part of a design you didn't draw. Your thread is consent. And if you lose it, you wander forever inside policies that keep certain people at the center and everyone else circulating like ventilation. In that reading, Theseus cuts more than a monster. He severs a network islands untying themselves from Cretan knots by courage and opportunism when Crete's weather changes. But the inner reading sits beside the geopolitical one and is not less true. The labyrinth is the self. Nested rooms of intention, memory, appetite, fear. The Minotaur is whatever you keep hidden because daylight makes it too large rage, desire, grief that you feed in the dark. The thread is attention. Ariadne is the moment of mercy that lets you look at the thing without becoming it. You go in, you confront the beast, and you don't smash the building on the way out, because you will need those corridors again to house the person you have become. A palace like Knossos encourages both readings. It compresses and releases you, moves you towards light after dark, makes you aware of your own feet in a way an open field never does. Architecture as temperament. Between these metaphors, the outer map of power and the inner map of psyche, the material culture keeps tugging at your sleeve, asking you to ground yourself. Bulls again. Because governance in Crete might have worked like ritual. Public performances that bind communities without a spear held against the ribs. Horns again. Because marking sacredness is also a way to mark territory. Snakes again. Because households survive on women's knowledge of what spoils and what keeps. And Crete seems to have found feminine forms a good shorthand for order. Labries again, because law that is unwritten but known is still edge-soft to show, hard to cross. Sometimes the trade web felt like rescue. Cretan ships bring oil when a neighbor's harvest fails, send back saffron and receive gold leaf, barter timber for copper, wool for ivory. Other times it felt like tributa, a polite word for telling smaller islands that their plenty is really yours, their best youth will learn your ways, their myths will have to share choruses with yours. These gestures don't need garrisons, they need fashion and frequency, two couriers that travel faster than law. Aegean peoples imitate the spirals and colors of Knossos because they want to. Soon they have to. Power that never calls itself power has a long reach. We cannot make the Minoans into saints of peace or monsters of control. The truth sits where truths often do, slightly aside. A people who mastered architecture because they understood bodies, who mastered sea because they understood patience, who mastered symbol because they understood repetition. And then they were gone. Not in a blink, not by a single blow, but by the gradual tilt of fortune, earthquakes, Thera's distant thunder, the arrival of mainland Greeks with their own very talkative tablets, trade routes shifting like tides. The labyrinth they built remains as a feeling more durable than stone. So, when you stand before a fresco where a girl or a boy, the gender is a costume here, more than a sentence somersaults over the living curve of a bull's back. See both stories. Outwardly, a state rehearsing harmony with danger to keep its neighbors impressed. Inwardly, a person learning to be brave inside a place that asks for it in measured steps. The horns on the parapet are both altar and warning. The snake in the figurine's hand is both household and underworld. The double axe on the pillar is both benediction and boundary. The labyrinth, in the end, is the route by which a culture moves through itself without getting lost, and the thread we keep is the refusal to simplify it into only one tale. The tablets will not tell us if we read them tomorrow. The sea might. It still touches Crete, the way a hand touches a friend's shoulder firmly, often with reminders. In the wash and pull you can hear a palace breathing, a people moving, a myth learning to be honest about what it remembers and what it invents. Bulls, snakes, a double axe, and a feeling that refuses to die. That is enough to walk by, for now. The end came twice, first as a roar you couldn't quite hear, then as a silence you couldn't quite explain. On Thera, Santorini, sometime in the 17th or 16th century BCE, depending on whose tree rings you favor, a mountain tore itself open and flung half its heart into the sky. The caldera we admire now is the crater's neat afterthought. What the Aegean felt then was a chain of consequences. Ash that traveled like a false winter. Tsunami that ran low coasts like a thief with long arms. Trade winds that lost their regular manners for a season or three. Crete wasn't burned flat. Knossos wasn't buried like Pompeii. But an island civilization built on timing, sowing, sailing, storing, found its metronome stumbling. Ships arrived late. Harvests sulked. The sea, once an ally, began to look like a negotiator with new terms. The palaces kept going. That is the second, stranger truth. No single catastrophe did for Knossos. The long shadow of Thera made everything more expensive: repairs, faith, patience, while the mainland Mycenaeans leaned over the straits with their own ideas of administration. By C0, 1450 BCE, the style had changed. Linear A tablets gave way to linear B. Bull, leaping remained on walls, but other motifs sharpened. Stockrooms still breathed oil and grain, but the ceilings named different stewards. Absorption is the historian's polite word for an arrangement made after one side runs out of leverage. You can still feel Knossos breathing after the takeover. Then, around c. 1375, 1350 BCE, the breath becomes intermittent. There is no single sack you can point to, no black layer of charcoal that suggests a splendid doom. The palace stopped with a whisper. Doors that had always opened on market day stayed shut. Roofs fell in by weather rather than war. The light wells filled slowly with the indifferent dust of centuries. 3 millennia later, a man with a notebook and a taste for story knelt to listen at the rubble's edge. Sir Arthur Evans arrived in 1900, looking not just for walls but for a world. He found both, and then he did something most archaeologists dream about and most historians fear. He restored. He named the people Minoans. He tied Labyrinth to labyrinth and gave the double axe a home address clever enough to stick. He painted fresco again, sometimes from fragments as delicate as breath, sometimes from absence as confident as a novelist. He poured concrete where timber once stood to show the grand stair its former dare, and in doing so made the ruin readable and controversial. Vision or vandalism? Both, depending on the corner and the scholar. But Evans gave Knossos back to the world with a grammar you can walk. He also gave the myth back a plausible house. and that is why tourists still find themselves turning corners and thinking of Ariadne without quite knowing why. He narrated. Modern scholarship has revised and corrected his narration. The palace, being older and less anxious, simply stands. You could end there, with a civilization that learned air and light and then learned how to leave, and a gentleman excavator who learned how to tell. But the last chord of this long night is an old favorite of ours. Siege not because Knossos fell to a ram, it didn't, but because palaces and cities everywhere have always rehearsed the same argument between wall and will. The connection is not tidy, but it is true. Architecture, myth, and war all understand the same triangle: spectacle, psychology, engineering. Start with the ram. It is a tree made purpose. It teaches walls the meaning of rhythm. The sound thud, thud, thud gets inside the heart before it gets inside the gate. It is theatre as much as physics. The hooded frame, wet hides steaming, crews chanting to keep the swing together. The defenders feel their stone become instrument. They drop rocks, they pour boiling oil or sand, they aim fire at the roof because fear loves smoke. Already you see the braid. Spectacle to unnerve, engineering to enable, psychology to crack something before the masonry does. Add range, the Greek torsion engines, and Roman ballistae turned, stored twist into flying intent. A stone arcing over a wall is a sentence about tomorrow. Your place is not safe. The trebuchet made gravity a colleague. When a counterweight dropped, the machine announced itself like weather. The stone arrived with the plausibility of fate. Commanders learned to throw not only boulders but messages dead animals, burning pitch, letters of plague whose handwriting was stink. Again the triangle, the shot seen, the mechanism understood, the courage altered. If walls will not yield outwardly, you remove the ground they stand on. Sapping is the language of patience translated into collapse. Miners listen for enemy picks like doctors for a bad rhythm. The supports burn. The wall sighs and sits down suddenly where it had stood for centuries. It is theatre no one sees until the reveal, and so perhaps the cruelest. A city can fail from underneath without ever being convinced by speeches from the field. Defenders answered with their own pages in the playbook. Greek fire secret, adhesive. Water's enemy turned siegecraft into alchemy. Murder holes taught gravity manners. Countermines gave the earth a second voice. And always the procession. Ladders, towers, mantlets machines that move a crowd towards courage by enclosing it in wood. You could watch a siege tower sway across a ditch like a walking threat to your story of invulnerability. Then gunpowder taught walls a new grammar. A round shot's admonition is concise. Medieval curtains and proud square towers discovered they spoke the wrong language of strength. Architects replied in bastions, angles, glacis. Starfort's geometry is simply engineering and psychology, drawn with a ruler, deflect, absorb, confuse. The spectacle is still there. Thunder, smoke. But the fear moves from the crowd on the wall to the accountant. Logistics, barrels, pay. The long arithmetic of endurance. Modern generals rebrand it shock and awe. Assyrian artists carved it already. Engines paraded, captives displayed, captions that shout inevitable. We are newer only in materials. If you want the crisp thread through all of this, it is attention weaponized. The ram demands you listen. The catapult demands you look up. The trebuchet demands you imagine the next stone before it flies. The tunnel demands you hear beneath your feet. Greek fire demands you believe your senses are lying because water fails. Gunpowder demands you learn the future shape of a wall before the cannonball tells you. Spectacle primes the audience. Psychology carries them to the decision. Engineering makes the decision true in stone. Cities that understood the triangle lasted longer. Besiegers who mastered it wrote treaties instead of epitaphs. Knossos, graciously, belongs to the other tradition. A palace that persuades you to move as it wishes without shouting. That, too, is a kind of power. It is why the labyrinth endures as a feeling, because it teaches without humiliating. Most walls learn the language of failure in the end. The better buildings, like the better stories, teach you the language of being led and let you keep your pride. The Minoans folded light into stone. The Assyrians folded fear into stone. The gunners folded thunder. We inherit all three dialects whenever we step through a gate, open a letter, watch a news clip, or trace our finger along an old plan. So, yes. An island's mountain exploded. A palace slowed. A mainland style arrived with a new script. And 3,000 years later, a man in a hat wrote the ruin back into being. And yes, rams, engines, towers, tunnels, fire, and finally the powder that made the old wall's boast sound quaint. Through it all runs the same lesson. Structures are arguments, machines are sentences, spectacle is punctuation, and people always are the readers who decide, for a while, what the text will mean.